He woke up on a strange beach, in a strange body, with strange hands. The last thing he remembered was the rain in Seoul and being hit by a car. And now, a glowing inscription was floating right in the air above him. The architect's system has been activated. Daniel Hyun unclenches his fingers and feels the sand beneath them. Fine, coral-colored. Not asphalt, not concrete, not a hospital ward floor. He opens his eyes. A sky without a single cloud. No power lines, no airplanes. He turns his head and sees water, turquoise, crystal clear to the bottom. A white crescent-shaped beach, rocks overgrown with greenery, and not a single person. He sits up. His head explodes with pain. He looks at his hands and doesn't recognize them. Long, pale, no calluses, no scar on the finger he got at the construction site in Jebel Ali when the crane cables snapped. Someone else's hands. A thin, young body in a dirty linen shirt, bare feet. He doesn't understand anything at all. Rain in Seoul. 18 hours at the construction site. A blow. Then nothing. And now sand and strange hands and a sky without airplanes. He stands up, and again that inscription flashes before his eyes.
Architecture, skill, rank E. Available, shelter, fire pit, simple chopping block. He reaches out. His fingers pass right through the letters. He thinks he's gone mad, thinks he's dead, thinks this is a coma and he's lying in Seoul and all this is the delirium of a dying brain. And then he notices the cove, and he forgets everything. He doesn't look at it like a man who's woken up on an unfamiliar shore. He looks at it like a port engineer with 6 years of experience. A horseshoe-shaped shelter from the northeast winds. Natural, rocky. 2 inlets near the shore, one deep, perfect for a pier. A granite cape to the right, a ready-made foundation for a lighthouse without a single cubic meter of concrete. Over the past 10 years, he's seen Singapore, Rotterdam, Jebel Ali. He's designed terminals worth billions, and not a single one started with a bay like this. The best natural site for a deep-water port he'd ever seen in his life. He laughs, hoarsely, like a man who's been told he's fired but handed $1 million lottery ticket. All right, Daniel, you've got an island. You've got a brain. In Jebel Ali, there wasn't even drinking water for the first 3 days, and nothing. He managed. Nearby on the sand stands a barrel of fresh water, a box of hard-as-rock crackers, a knife with a wooden handle, flint. 4 items. That's all he has. 6 hours until dark. He needs shelter. He needs a fire. He needs water because 1 barrel will last a week at most. He heads toward the jungle. Bamboo. He spots it right away. Thick, green stalks. He worked with bamboo in Singapore. Strong, flexible. It cuts with a knife if you know how. He cuts down the first stalk, a second, a third. By the end of an hour, 20 stalks lie on the sand. His unaccustomed hands are already turning red. Tomorrow there will be blisters. That doesn't stop him. He chooses a spot away from the beach. The beach is a tidal zone. Any engineer knows that. He climbs higher up the slope. A flat clearing. A rocky foundation. Good drainage. And then the interface flashes up again. A sketch of a shelter. Semi-transparent. Superimposed on reality. He sees every joint. The roof pitch for water runoff. It's like AutoCAD right in his head. He mentally rotates the structure, and it rotates. He sees that his plan was wrong. The entrance faced east. The morning sun would be blinding, so the entrance must face south. The roof at a 30-degree angle. He redraws the sketch in a second. The lines turn green. His hands move faster than he expected, not because his body is stronger, because every movement is precise, not a single wasted stroke.
3 hours later, the hut stands, with a gabled roof of palm leaves, with a raised floor. The system flashes. Experience points earned. He builds a fire. The flint strikes a spark on the third try. He eats 2 pieces of bread soaked in water. It tastes like cardboard, but it's calories. He lies down in the hut. Every muscle in his body aches. His palms are burning. But he has water. There is a fire. There is a knife. And there is a cove. 12 meters deep at the entrance, granite walls that break the waves better than any breakwater. In a past life, he would have built a port here for 50,000 TEU. He falls asleep with that thought. The morning of the second day begins with pain. His body is stiff. His palms are blistered just as he predicted. He goes to explore the island. He peels a piece of bark from a dead tree. He singes the edges over a fire. He takes charcoal from the night's campfire, and he draws a map. He measures. The distance is measured in steps. Each of his steps is exactly 75 centimeters. He checked 3 times. The northern part is rocky, cliffs, unsuitable for building. But on one of the cliffs he finds a spring. A thin stream of clear, cold water gushes from a crack in the rock, 30 meters above the beach. He checked it a handful and feels his body respond to every sip. Fresh water is life. But climbing 30 meters up a loose slope 3 times a day is death. Not immediately. In a week, his legs will give out, or he'll slip on a wet rock and break his neck. He needs to bring the water down. Any normal person would start digging a well. Daniel isn't a normal person. He's an engineer. He sits down and activates his terrain analysis. The rock becomes translucent. He sees the layers. Porous limestone. Beneath it, water-resistant shale. Between them, a lens of rainwater. The volume is about 400 cubic meters, enough to last for years. He calculates. The elevation difference is 30 meters. The detour along the rocky ledges is 300 meters. The slope is 1 in 10, enough for gravity flow. The material is bamboo, split and joined with overlapping joints. The joints are impregnated with resin. He sees the entire aqueduct in its entirety, like a finished project. The system confirms it. The blueprint turns green. He works 2 full days, cuts bamboo, splits it, scrapes out the partitions, boils resin in a coconut shell, secures the sections to the rock. His hands are covered in blood by the end of the first day. The blisters have burst. He wraps his palms with strips from his shirt and continues. By the evening of the second day, 300 meters of bamboo pipe are ready, 3 elbows on rock supports. He removes the plug from the top end. Silence. Then a rustle. Then a murmur. Then water flows from the pipe. A thin stream, steady, clear. He holds out a hollowed-out log. An hour later, the flask is full. By morning, enough for the whole day, and tomorrow, and every day after that. He sits and listens to the murmur. The stars light up one by one. Unfamiliar constellations, a foreign sky, a foreign world, a foreign body. But water flows downward. That doesn't change. Not in Singapore, not in Rotterdam, not here either. Physics works the same in any world. And as long as it works, he has a chance. He doesn't yet know that in a month, the waves will wash a half-dead girl with a shattered leg onto this shore. That the running water in this tub will save her life. That in 6 months, the sister of the man whose body he wears will sail here. Kale Vesper, the 3rd son accused of treason and exiled to die. He knows only one thing. Tomorrow he needs to build a cutting block, then a fishing rod, then catch a fish. One task after another, just like on any construction site. The 3rd day begins with fish, or rather with the lack thereof. He makes a fishing rod out of bamboo and vines. He bends a thorn into a hook. 2 hours without a bite. The thorn is too soft. The fish takes the bait and swims away. He needs a bone hook. He remembers the scattering of seashells on the northern shore. He finds a shell the size of his palm. He cracks it open with a stone. He sharpens the shard. An hour's work. The hook is rough but sharp. The first fish bites in 20 minutes, the second in 10, the third in 5. By noon, 7 fish. He activates the deck's blueprint, a flat stone on 2 supports. He fillets the fish. His hands remember. Not these hands. The hands of Daniel Hyun, who has been cleaning fish since he was 6 in his grandmother's kitchen in Incheon. His body doesn't remember, but his brain is in command. He hangs the fillets over a smoking fire. He adds green leaves for smoke. By evening, he has 3 days' worth of smoked fish. He spends the 4th and 5th days exploring. The island stretches 8 kilometers from north to south, a cove on the western shore. On the southeastern shore, he finds clay, gray, fatty, good for firing. That means bricks. That means a kiln. Nearby, in the cliff, a white layer, limestone. If fired, it will produce lime. If mixed with sand and water, it will produce mortar. If mixed with volcanic ash, it hardens. He looks up. He gazes at the gently sloping, smooth hills in the center of the island. A distinctive shape. If the island is volcanic, then there is tephra somewhere here. And if there is tephra, and there is lime, then it has pozzolanic cement. Roman concrete. The very same kind used to build the Pantheon, which has stood for 2,000 years and hasn't cracked. He feels like sitting right down in the clay and bursting out laughing. Roman concrete on a deserted island. In another world, memories of a stranger's body surface in fragments. Silverhook Island. Kale Vesper. Cousin Remington, who forged letters and accused him of conspiring with pirates. The sentence was called a merciful exile. The mercy was that they didn't cut off his head, but simply left him to die on a bare rock. He feels nothing. It's someone else's story, someone else's pain. He has his own family. Had. In Seoul. He clenches his teeth. Don't think about it. Now he has an island. On the 6th day, he begins to build a house, not a shack, a real frame house, 4 by 6 meters. The system displays the blueprint. He chops down trees with a knife. It's torture, but the system shows him where to strike, at what angle. Every blow removes the maximum amount of wood. He fells the first palm tree in 40 minutes. A crew with a chainsaw would have done it in 30 seconds. But there is no chainsaw. Instead, there is endless rage that he pours into every blow. Rage at the rain in Seoul, at the taxi that didn't hear him, at this body that isn't his, at this world that isn't his. He chops and chops and chops. The 7th day, the 8th, the 9th. By the end of the 9th day, the frame stands. 4 support posts dug in half a meter deep, walls of split bamboo, a roof of 3 layers of palm leaves. The system flashes. Rank upgraded, E to D. New blueprints, masonry, simple docks, a kiln. He goes inside, sits down at the table, and begins to draw. Not an island, a port, a dock in a deep cove, a pier jutting from a granite headland, warehouses on the upper terrace, a lighthouse on the headland, charcoal on bark. The lines are rough but precise. He knows every dimension, every tolerance. 6 years in an international consortium. Here he needs a port for wooden ships with a draft of 3 to 4 meters. It's like returning to a summer cottage after a skyscraper. He knows how to do it. The question is something else. For whom? He is alone on a deserted island. A port is not a building. A port is a place where people stop. And there are no people. He needs people, but first people need to know he is here. He looks at the granite cape, visible from the sea for dozens of miles. If he lit a large, constant fire on it, any ship within a 20-mile radius would see it. A signal fire, not a lighthouse. A lighthouse is still a long way off, but it's a start. He steps out onto the threshold of his house and looks at the cove that will become a port in a year. He doesn't know that for sure yet, but he feels it as clearly as he feels the dip in the water table beneath a spring. A professional's instinct. 12 years of education and 6 years of practice compressed into a single, quiet certainty. This island will become a port. He will build it. Alone. With his bare hands. With a knife and flint and glowing blueprints in his head. And then people will come. Because people always come where there is a port. The 10th day began with the construction of a kiln. Daniel hauled the clay from the southeast shore in 4 trips. Each took an hour and a half. There along the shore, back along the shore. With 20 kilograms of wet clay in a sack woven from vines. His legs were buzzing. His back ached. But the clay was needed. Without clay, there are no bricks. Without bricks, there is no kiln. Without a kiln, there is no lime. Without lime, there is no mortar. Without mortar, there is no masonry. And without masonry, there is no port. He built the kiln according to the system's blueprint, dome-shaped, with a loading window and a flue, waist-high, walls a palm's width thick. He dried it for 3 days, then fired it on low heat for 2 more days, then on high heat for another day. The clay became ceramic, red, resonant, strong. On the 16th day, he loaded the first batch of limestone into the kiln. He packed the firebox full of wood and waited. The temperature for burning lime is about 900 degrees. His kiln didn't reach 900. Maybe 700, maybe 800. He didn't know for sure, there was no thermometer. But he knew the signs, the color of the flame, the color of the stone, the sound of crackling. He fired it for 12 hours. He changed the firewood every 2 hours. He didn't sleep. He drank water from the aqueduct. He chewed on smoked fish. By the morning of the 17th day, he raked aside the coals and retrieved what was left of the limestone. White lumps, light, porous, quicklime. He dropped a single lump into a wooden bowl of water. The water hissed, it bubbled. The lump began to disintegrate and heat up. Steam rose above the bowl. Slaked lime. It works. He sat on the ground next to the stove and looked at the bowl of boiling lime and smiled. Not widely, just the corner of his mouth, like a man who had solved an equation that seemed unsolvable. Now he needed tephra, volcanic ash. He spent the entire 17th day searching. He combed the central part of the island, hills, ravines, the beds of dried-up streams, and he found it. On the northwestern slope of the main hill, on a cliff above an old landslide, he saw a layer. Gray, fine-grained, porous, pumice-like. He took a handful, rubbed it between his fingers. Light, abrasive, with a characteristic glassy sheen on the fracture. Tephra, volcanic ash thousands of years old, compressed by time but still usable. He filled a whole bag, returned to camp. He mixed the tephra with slaked lime and sand from the beach, the ratio 2 to 1 to 1. He knew that ratio by heart. A lecture on the history of building materials in his sophomore year at MIT. Professor Marquez. Roman concrete, or opus cementitium, tephra plus lime plus seawater. A material that grows stronger with age because sea salt crystallizes in the pores and fills the microcracks. He mixed the first batch in a hollowed-out log, a thick gray mass. He poured it into a mold made of a bamboo frame, a smooth block measuring 30 by 20 by 15 centimeters. He carried it into the shade. Now to wait. Setting will take a day. Full strength in a week. If he did everything right, in a week he'll have the first concrete block in the world. If not, then the mix was wrong. and he'll try another one. On the 18th day, while the concrete was setting, he worked on the pier. Not a real pier, just a simple stone jetty. Rank D allowed him to build simple piers. He went down to the cove, waded into the water up to his waist. The system overlaid a grid on the seabed: depth, soil composition, direction of the underwater. He could see everything. Sand on a clay subgrade, a solid foundation. It would hold the load. He began hauling stones, large ones, heavy, from the slopes around the cove. Each stone weighed between 20 and 50 kilograms. He rolled them across the sand, pushed them into the water, stacked them one on top of the other. The system showed him where to place each stone, at what angle, with what gap. He worked like a machine, methodically, non-stop.
10 hours a day, 4 days. On the 22nd day, a rough stone ridge jutted out of the water, 5 meters long, 1 meter wide. The top surface half a meter above the water level at low tide. It wasn't a pier, it was an ugly pile of stones, but he could tie a boat to it, if he had a boat. He looked at the cove. A boat. He needed a boat. Not for fishing, to explore the underwater part of the bay. He needed to know the exact depth, the exact topography of the seabed, the exact composition of the sediment on the bottom. The terrain analysis showed the big picture, but designing a port required details. On the 23rd day, he found a suitable tree, a thick trunk, soft heartwood. He felled it in 2 hours, chopped off the branches, cut it down to a length of 3 meters, and began to hollow it out, with a knife, with fire, with a knife again. A dugout canoe, the simplest watercraft in human history. You burn the heartwood, scrape out the charcoal. Repeat. He worked for 5 days. By the end of the 28th day, the boat was ready. Rough, lopsided, but buoyant. He launched it from his stone pier and it didn't capsize. That was all he needed. On the 29th day, he checked the concrete block. 12 days since it was poured. He removed the bamboo formwork. The gray block lay on the ground, smooth, solid. He tapped it with his knuckles. The sound was firm, hollow. He lifted the block, heavy. He set it on a rock. He picked up another, larger rock. He swung, he struck. The block cracked, but it didn't crumble. The crack was clean, even, no crumbling. He struck harder. The block split into 2 pieces. The fracture was dense, uniform, no voids, no delamination. The concrete works. The proportions were right. He stood there with the 2 halves of the concrete block in his hands and thought of Professor Marquez from MIT. He would have appreciated it. Daniel had made Roman concrete on a deserted island in another world, using a stone kiln and bamboo forms. Only there was no one to tell. By the end of the first month, he had the following: a frame house, an aqueduct with running water, a kiln, a supply of quicklime, a supply of tephra, a working concrete recipe, a stone pier, a dugout canoe, a smokehouse, a week's supply of smoked fish, a map of the island, and a sketch of the future port on a piece of bark above his table. Rank D. The system showed progress. A bar, about a third full until the next rank. He needed to build more. Stone, not limestone, not sandstone, basalt. Dark, dense, heavy, the perfect building material. But that wasn't what took his breath away. The stone had been hewn, smooth edges, right angles, blocks, stacked in rows, covered in dirt and overgrown with roots, but unmistakably man-made. He jumped from the dugout into the water, swam closer, ran his hand over the surface of a block, a clean cut, made with a tool, not a stone axe, not a bronze chisel, something better, more precise. He activated the terrain analysis. The system peeled back the layers, and he saw it.
beneath the jungle, beneath the layer of soil, beneath the roots and bushes. A ring. A massive ring of basalt blocks, encircling the entire bay, approximately 800 meters in diameter, 2 meters thick, ranged from 3 to 5 meters, depending on the section. Most of it was buried and ruined, but the foundation was intact. And in several places on the inner side of the ring, he saw recesses, distinctive ones, rectangular, with grooves for horizontal beams, port moorings, mooring bollards, mooring cleats.
It was a port, an old port, a dead port, buried under 5 centuries of jungle and oblivion. He sat in a dugout canoe in the middle of the bay and looked at the semi-transparent map of the ruins superimposed by the system onto reality. He looked at the ring and understood. Someone before him, 500 years ago, looked at this very same bay, saw what he sees, and built. Orn Tal, the main port of the fallen Orn Empire. He had heard that name, fragments of Kale Vesper's memory, children's tales. The Orn Empire, great and vanished. Gone in a single night, along with all its cities and ports and people. No one knew where, no one knew why. But the port was here. The foundation was intact. The walls still stand. The basalt blocks are hewn so precisely that you couldn't slip a knife blade between them. 5 centuries have passed, and the masonry holds. He ran his hand over the stone once more. Cold, smooth, eternal. The system flashed. Ancient foundations detected. Potentially usable in construction. Bonus to durability. Bonus to construction speed. He laughed, quietly. Not out of joy, out of the sheer scale of it. He'd been looking for a place to build a dock, and he'd found the finished foundation of an entire port. A port built by engineers who knew their craft better than in this world over the past 500 years. He spent the next 4 days in the ruins, clearing, exploring, documenting. A map of the ruins grew alongside the map of the island on the wall of his house. He found the foundation of a warehouse, a large one, 20 by 40 meters. The walls up to a height of 1.5 meters were preserved almost perfectly. You found the base of a tower, round, 6 meters in diameter, walls a meter thick. A lighthouse, or a watchtower. He found the remains of a road, paved with the same basalt blocks, leading from the bay up the slope toward the central part of the island. He found a system of canals, narrow, lined with stone, sloping toward the sea. Drainage, diverting rainwater away from the warehouses. Well designed, well thought out. He stood over the map of the ruins and saw. Orn Tal had been designed by a master, not just a good engineer, a genius. The layout of the warehouses took wind direction into account for natural ventilation. The shape of the quay wall followed the contour of the bay with a precision that minimized the reflected wave. The drainage channels were designed for a volume of rainfall that occurs once every 50 years. Whoever built this port, he thought centuries ahead. And he thought like Daniel. No, Daniel thought like him. On the 36th day, he began building on the old foundations. First, a warehouse. 20 by 40 meters is too much for one man and an empty island. He cut off a quarter, 5 by 10 meters. He raised the walls on the imperial foundation. The salt blocks from the ruins plus his own concrete in the joints. The walls went up quickly, faster than he expected. The system gave a bonus for using ancient foundations. Each block fell into place as if it knew where it belonged. He made the roof out of bamboo and palm leaves, a temporary one. He'd replace it later. But right now he needed a covered area, for storage, to work in the rain, for the future. 4 days. The warehouse is ready. Small, sturdy, with stone walls 1/2 meter thick, with a wide entrance facing the bay, with a floor of packed earth. The system flashed. Construction complete. Experience earned. Significant.
More than for a house, more than for an aqueduct. The ancient foundation multiplied the reward. On the 40th day, he began salting fish on an industrial scale. Industrial, in his understanding. 10 fish a day. He gutted them, sprinkled them with sea salt that he had evaporated in a ceramic dish over a fire. He stacked them in baskets made of vines. He placed them in the warehouse. A week later, he had a month's supply. Why? He didn't know why. No, he did know. Someday someone would come, a merchant, a fisherman, a shipwreck survivor, anyone. And when that someone came, Daniel would be able to offer them clean water, a roof over their head, and food. A port doesn't start with a pier. A port begins with having something to offer to whoever arrives. He repeated this to himself like a mantra, every evening, sitting at the table in his house, looking at the port sketch on the wall, drawing new lines, adding details, adjusting angles. He talked to himself, out loud. Because silence on a remote island kills faster than hunger. Right. The quay wall. Length along the foundation, 30 meters, 3 meters wide, 2.5 meters high from the bottom. Material, basalt from the ruins plus concrete. Load. Let's say a ship with a displacement of 200 tons. Let's say wind load during a storm. Let's say a 2-meter-high wave. Safety factor, 2. No, 3. It has no steel piles, just stone and concrete. So, mass. So, thicker walls. So, a deeper foundation. He calculated it in his head, without a calculator. No computer, no reference books, just his memory. 12 years of education compressed into formulas he remembered as firmly as his own name. His real name, not Kale Vesper. Daniel Hyun. By the end of the second month, his rank had risen to C. The system unlocked new blueprints, breakwaters, warehouses, dock gates. The scale had grown, the possibilities had grown. But he still had only 2 hands, and the days were still 24 hours long. And he had enough strength for 10 hours of work before his body refused to obey. He fell asleep instantly every night, like a switch. His head touched the bamboo headrest, and that was it. Darkness. No dreams. No thoughts. His body recovered. The calluses on his palms grew as hard as soles. His muscles strengthened. The foreign body was becoming his own, slowly. Through pain and sweat and thousands of knife-like strikes against wood and stone. He was changing, and the island was changing with him. The storm came at night, without warning, without a forewind, just silence, and then a roar. Daniel woke up to the sound of the roof above him humming like a sail. The house shook, the bamboo walls bent, rain pelted them horizontally. He jumped up, grabbed a knife, not because the knife could help against the storm, but because it was the only thing he did reflexively in this world. Grabbed a knife, rushed outside. The wind hit him in the chest and nearly knocked him off his feet. Darkness. Total darkness. Clouds covered the moon and stars. Rained down his face so hard he couldn't keep his eyes open. He pressed himself against the wall of the house. The wall held. 4 support posts dug 1/2 meter into the ground. Cross braces, diagonal ties. He had built it with a safety margin, and now that margin was working. The house would hold. But the aqueduct. He ran up the slope, barefoot on wet stones in pitch darkness. He slipped 3 times. He fell once. He cut his knee on a rock. He didn't stop. He made it to the first bend of the aqueduct. He ran his hand along the bamboo pipe. It was intact. Leaks. The second bend. Also intact. The third. He felt it before he saw it. The pipe was vibrating, not from the wind, from the water. The spring had grown stronger. The rain was feeding the pipe, and it was overflowing. The pressure in the pipe had risen. One of the joints was leaking, a thin trickle from the side. He took off his shirt, wrapped it around the joint, pressed it down, waited. The leak stopped. A temporary fix. He'd have to redo it tomorrow, but it would do for now. He climbed back down to the house, soaked to the skin, with a bleeding knee, with hands trembling from the cold and exhaustion. He crawled inside. He lay down. The roof was leaking in 2 places. He held up halves of coconut shells and closed his eyes. He fell asleep to the roar of the rain and the whistling of the wind. In the morning, the storm was gone, as if it had never happened. The sky was clear, the sun was bright. The sea was smooth and sparkling, as if nothing had happened during the night. But the evidence lay on the shore. Broken branches, bushes torn up by the roots, the beach churned by the waves. And something else. He saw it when he went down to the cove to check his stone pier. The pier had held. Sand in it, salt in it. If he didn't wash it out, there would be infection. If he didn't set it, there would be gangrene. He wasn't a doctor, he was an engineer, but he knew first aid. Courses at the construction site, mandatory, every 6 months. Immobilizing fractures, cleaning wounds, tourniquets, splints. He lifted her. She was light. Or maybe he had gotten stronger over the past 2 months. He carried her up the slope toward the house, laid her on the bamboo floor, brought water from the aqueduct, clean, running water. He washed the wound, carefully, without rushing. Washed out the sand, washed out the salt, washed out the dried blood. The wound was deep but clean after washing. He tore a strip from his spare shirt, boiled it in a ceramic bowl over the fire, bandaged it, then a splint. 2 bamboo stalks along either side of the shin. He wrapped them with strips of cloth, tightly but not too tight. He didn't want to cut off the blood supply. He couldn't set the fracture. That required a doctor, or at least someone who'd done it before. He hadn't. He could only immobilize it and pray. Pray to the 7 winds, or to anyone. She woke up by evening, opened her eyes, gray, hard, like wet granite. Looked at him, then at the walls around her, then at her leg in the splint, then at him again. She said something. Her voice was hoarse, cracked. He didn't understand a word. She repeated it. He understood, not with his ears, not with Daniel's brain, with Kale's brain. A foreign memory translated it. She asked where she was. He replied that she was on an island, that she'd been washed ashore by a storm, that her leg was broken and he'd splinted it but couldn't set it. She was silent. She looked at him. Then she asked who he was. He replied that he was Kale Vesper, the 3rd son of House Vesper. She snorted. Even with a broken leg, even half dead, she snorted. She said she knew the Vespers, northern nobles. They play at being lords but can't tell a ship from a rowboat. He didn't argue. He brought her water, smoked fish. She drank greedily, ate slowly. Then she leaned back on the floor and closed her eyes. A minute later, she was asleep. He sat beside her and watched her. The first person in 2 months, alive, real, breathing, with blood and pain and a spirit that sparkled even in a semi-conscious state. He didn't know her name. He would learn it tomorrow. Amber Kane, assistant navigator on the merchant ship Harpy, home port Velros. A ship that had sunk along with the captain and 39 crew members because the noble captain had ignored her warning about the current. 39 people. She remembered every name. In the morning, she told the story, not to him, to the ceiling. She lay on her back, staring at the bamboo rafters, and spoke. The ship was sailing south from Velros with a cargo of wool and iron. She warned the captain that the current had changed and that they needed to take a more seaworthy course. The captain said that a sailor's girl wouldn't tell a nobleman how to steer a ship. 6 hours later, They were swept onto the reefs. She saw people drowning, the hull breaking apart, the water. She fell silent, clenched her fists. She looked at Daniel. She asked if he, too, would ignore her because she was a sailor and he was a lord. He replied that he didn't ignore people who understood the winds and currents better than he did. She looked at him for a long time, with suspicion, with distrust, with something else he couldn't read. Then she turned away toward the wall and fell asleep. For the next 2 weeks, he cared for her and built at the same time. In the morning, he changed her bandage. He rinsed the wound with clean water from the aqueduct. He checked the splint. He fed her. He gave her water. Then he went to work. In the evening, he returned. He changed the bandage again. A tub made from a hollowed-out log with running water from the aqueduct became the key. He carried it to the bath every day. He lowered her leg into the clean running water for 2 hours. Cool, clean. It washed away the infection. It reduced the swelling. By the end of the first week, the swelling had gone down. By the end of the second week, the wound had begun to heal. Her leg was still broken. He hadn't been able to set it. But there was no infection. The pain had subsided. Amber began to sit down, then to stand on her good leg, then to hobble with a crutch she'd made from bamboo in 10 minutes. On the third day of hobbling, she hobbled over to his and sat down on a rock, and watched. He was building the wall of the second warehouse, on the imperial foundation, basalt blocks,
Concrete in the joints. He worked quickly and precisely. Every stone fell into place on the first try, because he could see the blueprint, because the system showed him where and how. But Amber didn't know about the system. She saw a nobleman, a gaunt, pale nobleman who, all alone on a deserted island, had built a house and an aqueduct and a warehouse and a pier and a smokehouse, who was drenched in sweat, hauling stones and mixing concrete with hands covered in calluses that were less than 2 months old, who drew lines in the sand like she'd never seen any harbor master in Velrose draw, and she'd seen the best. She asked where he'd learned. He replied that he'd studied long ago and far away. She asked what that gray mass between the stones was. He replied that it was concrete, a mixture of lime, volcanic ash, sand, and water. She asked where he'd learned that recipe. He replied that he'd read it in an old book. She looked at him with that look she always gave him whenever he said something strange, narrow-eyed, appraising, skeptical. She didn't argue, but she remembered. Amber remembered everything. By the 5th day on the rock, she began giving advice.
Daniel, you're building the wall against the prevailing wind. But here in the winter months, the wind shifts to the southwest. He stopped. He looked at her. She was right. He didn't know the local wind patterns. The terrain analysis showed the current wind direction, but not the seasonal changes. And she knew. 10 years at sea. She had been sailing these waters since she was 14. She knew every current, every wind, every shoal within a 300-mile radius. He repositioned the wall, on her advice. She looked at him. He could see she didn't believe him. The Lord listened to the sailor, just like that, without argument, without condescension. He listened and rebuilt it. She blinked, turned away. He noticed she swallowed hard. From that day on, they worked together. She sat on a rock with a crutch and spoke. He stood waist-deep in the water and laid stones. She knew the sea, he knew construction. She told him where the waves would break. He built it so the waves would break. By the end of the 3rd month, the pier had grown to 10 meters, a real wooden pier on a stone foundation, with cleats for mooring made from processed basalt blocks, with a ladder to the shore,
With a platform for unloading. The system flashed. The structure was complete. Experience was credited. Significant. Very significant. Progress toward the next rank had passed the halfway mark. At the same time, he built a signal fire on a granite cape, a stone platform,
2 by 2 meters, paved with basalt, with a windbreak on 3 sides, a supply of dry firewood under a canopy nearby. Every evening, he climbed the headland and lit it. The fire burned until morning, steady, bright, visible from the sea. He didn't know if anyone saw it, but he lit it every evening, without fail, because that too was a form of building a presence. He is here. The island is inhabited. A fire burns here. There is a dock here, and water, and food, and a man who knows how to build. Come. One night, Amber hobbled up to the cape. He didn't hear her coming. He just turned around, and there she was, standing next to him, in his old shirt, which was too big for her, with a crutch, with hair wet with sweat. Climbing up to the cape on one good leg is a feat. She didn't consider it a feat. She sat down next to the campfire, looked at the fire, then at the sea, then at the cove below, the pier.
The house, the warehouse, the aqueduct. Everything he had built in 3 months, with his bare hands, with a knife and flint. She said she'd never seen anything like it. He replied that this was only the beginning. She looked at him, for a long time, not with a narrowed, appraising gaze, a different one, warm, almost frightened. She said that if he was crazy, he was the most useful crazy person she'd ever met. He laughed. She didn't laugh. She stared at the fire, and a minute later, she said quietly that she would stay. She didn't ask. She stated it. She would stay on the island, because she had nowhere else to go. And because here, for the first time in 10 years, someone had listened to her when she said which way the wind was blowing. On the 102nd day, the first ship arrived at Silverhook. Daniel saw it from the cape early in the morning, a sail on the horizon, dirt yellow, patched. The ship was sailing erratically, yawing, which meant the rudder or the rigging was damaged. He went down to Amber. She was already standing on the pier, she from under her arm. She said it was a Velrosian barge, a merchant ship, single-masted, 100-tonner, old. You can tell by the sails. She said it was looking for shelter. A storm 3 days ago had battered it, and it couldn't go any further with a rudder like that. She said it had seen the fire on the cape. That's why it turned. Daniel nodded. For 3 months, he'd lit a fire every evening, and here was the result. The ship entered the bay 2 hours later, slowly, carefully. The captain was experienced. He sounded the depth with a lead line before proceeding. Then he saw the pier, and froze. Daniel could see it even from the shore, how the man on deck stopped moving and just stood there, watching. A pier on a deserted island, a stone pier, a wooden deck, cleats for mooring, a ladder. The man on deck looked at it as if it were a ghost. The ship pulled up to the pier. Daniel caught the rope that was thrown and wrapped it around a cleat. The first ship at his pier. He remembered that moment. The smell of tarred wood and wet canvas, the creaking of ropes, the lapping of water between the ship's side and the pier, the voices of sailors above. A man came down the gangplank from the ship, an old man, 60 or older. A weather-beaten face the color of dark bronze, a white beard trimmed short. Eyes like a hawk's, small, sharp, all-seeing. He looked Daniel up and down, then the pier, then the warehouse behind the pier, then the house further up the slope, then Daniel again. He introduced himself as Captain Tobias Orn. Daniel didn't flinch at the sound of the name. He didn't yet know what it meant. He introduced himself as Cale Vesper. Captain Tobias raised an eyebrow. He asked if he was the Vesper from the Northern League. Daniel replied that he was. The captain asked what the third son of the Vesper family was doing alone on an island 300 miles from the nearest shore. Daniel replied that he was living and building. Captain Tobias looked at the dock again, then at his ship. Then he said his rudder was broken, and asked if it could be repaired here. Daniel said it could.
He led Tobias to the storeroom. He showed him the tools. A knife, several stone chisels he'd made himself, a hatchet made from a basalt chip tied to a wooden handle. Tobias looked at them and said nothing. Then he looked out at the bay, at the depth of the water by the pier, at the walls of the bay, at the way the waves rolled in and broke on the inner headland. He was a captain. He had sailed these waters for 40 years. He knew what a good bay looked like, and he could see that this bay was the best. He turned to Daniel and asked how he knew how to build a pier. Daniel replied that he had studied it. Tobias asked where. Daniel said far away. Tobias didn't press the matter. He was the kind of person who respected other people's secrets because he had plenty of his own. For 2 days, Tobias and his crew of 6 repaired the rudder. Daniel helped. He didn't know much about shipbuilding, but he knew about wood, about joints, about loads. He looked at the broken rudder and saw the problem. The hinge. A wooden pin in a metal loop. The pin had cracked because the grain was oriented incorrectly. Across the grain, not along it. He told Tobias this. Tobias looked at the pin, then at Daniel. Then he said that in 40 years, not a single shipwright had explained to him why pins break, but this boy on a bare island had explained it in a minute. He didn't say it as a compliment. He said it as a fact. Tobias paid in silver, 3 coins. Daniel's first money in this world. Heavy, with the profile of some bearded man. He didn't need the money yet. There was no one to pay here, and nothing to pay for. But this was the beginning of trade, the beginning of the economy, the beginning of the port. Before leaving, Tobias stood on the deck and looked toward the shore. He said he would return. Daniel asked why. Tobias replied that in 40 years at sea he had learned to recognize 2 things, a good cove and a man who knows what to do with it, and that on this island he had found both. He left. The sails faded beyond the horizon. Daniel stood on the pier and watched them go. 3 silver coins in his pocket, an empty cove, silence. Amber approached from behind, tapping her crutch. She said the old man would return. Daniel nodded. She said he would bring others. Daniel nodded again. She said they needed to be ready for that. He looked at her. She was right. 1 ship was a fluke. 2 was the beginning. 3 is a port. He needs more. More docks, more warehouses, more water, more food, more of everything. They worked like madmen for the next 3 weeks. Daniel built. Amber organized. Her leg was healing crookedly. She limped. She would limp forever. But that didn't stop her from standing on the shore for 10 hours a day and commanding an imaginary 1-person work crew with such fury as if 100 sailors stood behind her. She marked lines on the shore with a stick. She watched the tides and recorded the water levels with notches on a stone. She calculated the tidal range, 1.5 meters. That's important for the pier, for the dock, for everything. 2 weeks after Tobias left, Daniel began building a second pier, longer than the first, 20 meters, on the old imperial foundation that stretched along the bay's shore. The salt blocks from the ruins, concrete in the joints. A wooden deck on top made of split palm trunks, cleats every 5 meters. The system was running at full capacity. Blueprints, calculations, every stone in its place, every joint precise. Tobias returned on the 21st day after his departure. Not alone. 3 ships came with him. 2 old barges just like this one and a larger schooner. 4 captains, 18 sailors. They stood on the decks and looked out at the bay, at the 2 piers, at the warehouses, at the lighthouse on the cape, at the house on the hillside, at the aqueduct, at the man standing on the pier in a dirty shirt, waiting for their mooring lines. Tobias was the first to go ashore. He walked over to Daniel. He looked at the second pier, at the concrete joints, at the cleats, at the ladder. He said he'd told 3 ports about Silverhook, and no one had believed him. He'd had to bring them here to show them. Daniel led the captains through the port. The port. He thought of that word for the first time. Not an island, not a camp, a port. He showed them the warehouses, clean, dry, with stone walls. He showed them the aqueduct and the water supply system. Clean, fresh water, free for any ship. He showed them the smokehouse and the fish stocks, food to replenish supplies. He showed them the repair yard on the shore, with a shed, with tools, stone ones, wooden, rough, but functional. The captains watched and said nothing. One of them, a short, stocky man with a gold earring, asked how much it cost to dock. Daniel named his price, 1 silver coin per day. Water was free. Repairs were by separate agreement. The captain with the earring laughed. He said that in Velros, they charge 5 silver coins for 1 night in the open harbor, and water costs extra.
Daniel nodded. He knew. Or rather, Kale knew. The memory of a foreign body, port prices, trade rates, duties. All of this came to mind when needed. 4 ships lay at his docks for 3 days. The sailors made repairs, restocked their water, rested. Some helped Daniel, for a fee. The silver came back to him in the form of working hands. 3 sailors hauled as much stone in 2 days as he would have hauled in a week. He paid them generously, not because he could afford it, because people remember generosity, and they come back. When the ships left, Daniel had 12 silver coins, and something more important than silver, a rumor. The 4 captains would sail to 4 different ports and tell of an island with docks and free water, and a strange young lord who charges 1 silver coin a day and builds like no one else. That's better than any advertisement. That's a trade route. Ships follow profit, and profit follows a good port. On the 130th day, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. A small yawl, a fishing boat with a single sail. It entered the bay at dawn. He was standing on the cape by the signal fire and saw it, small, tattered,
with patches on the sail, and 4 figures on board. He went down to the dock. Amber was already there, with a cleaver at her belt, which she had found somewhere among the debris washed up by the storm. The Yalik pulled up. A girl stepped off the boat. No, a young woman, 16, slender, pale with dark braids, with enormous eyes that held enough stubbornness to feed an army. She looked at Daniel for a long time, intently, like a person who had been walking through the desert and finally saw water. Behind her stood 3 people, 2 elderly men and 1 woman, servants, you could tell by their clothes, worn out, exhausted. They had clearly been at sea for a long time. The girl took a step forward, then another. Then she stopped 2 steps away from him. She said 1 word, "Brother." The memory of Kale Vesper exploded in his head. Lena, his younger sister, 16 years old, the only one in the whole family who had written to him in prison, the only one who hadn't believed the charges, the only one who had come. She stood before him, small, pale, with lips chapped by the sun and salt, with dark circles under her eyes. She had made her way through an escape from the family castle,
Through bribing the guards,
through a storm, across 300 miles of open sea in a fishing boat, to find him. Not him. Kale. Her brother. Daniel stood and looked at her, and something tightened inside him. Cold. Heavy. He wasn't her brother. He was an engineer from Incheon, Korean on his father's side, an American by citizenship, an MIT graduate. A man from another world. He didn't know this girl, didn't remember her voice, didn't remember her face. He remembered his sister, in Seoul, who, in his past life, was most likely burying him right now, or had already buried him.
Lena Vesper stood before him and waited. Her eyes were shining. Her hands were clenched into fists. She was afraid. Afraid that he had changed. Afraid that he wouldn't recognize her. Afraid that he would send her away. Daniel took a step forward. He placed his hand on her head and said one word. Lena. She clung to him, her slender arms wrapped around him so tightly his ribs ached. She was crying, quietly, silently. Only her shoulders shook. He stood there and held her, and thought. He had just decided, not consciously, not after long deliberation, he just decided.
Like he used to decide on the construction site, instantly, based on a blueprint that formed in his head in a second. He would be her brother, not Kale, not pretending to be Kale, just being a brother, to this girl who had crossed the sea to find a dead man. She deserved a brother, and he would be that brother. This decision would break him, he knew it. A lie that couldn't be sustained forever. Sooner or later she'd notice that he didn't remember his childhood, didn't remember the servants' names, didn't remember his first horse, his mother's birthday, or his father's favorite song. She'd notice that he'd changed, not just changed, become a different person. But not now. Lena changed everything. Not because she built things. She didn't build things. Her hands were too slender and too aristocratic. She changed the port because she knew how to do what Daniel didn't. To count, to keep records, to haggle, to read contracts, to speak 6 languages. On the second day after her arrival, she sat down at his desk. She spread out a map on the desk in front of her, his charcoal sketches, notes on supplies, scribbled on scraps of wood. She looked at it for 5 minutes. Then she looked at him and said that he had no accounting, no schedule, no pricing policy, no contractual framework, not even a basic registry of the ships that came and went. He replied that he was an engineer, not an accountant. She blinked. Then she repeated his word. Engineer. He realized he had misspoken. Kale Vesper was not an engineer. Kale Vesper was the 3rd son of an impoverished northern house, and he had never been called an engineer. He corrected himself. He said he meant builder. Lena looked at him for a long time, with that same look. She remembered. But she didn't ask. Not now. By the end of the first week, Silverhook had a register, written by Lena in small, neat handwriting on sheets of paper she had brought with her. 12 sheets. She had carried them through the storm. Paper, ink, feathers. The Book of Maritime Law of the Republic of Velros. 3 books on heraldry. Silver. She had brought silver. 18 coins, everything she could steal from the family castle. Daniel looked at it and realized that this child had been preparing. She hadn't fled in panic. She had prepared, as if for a military operation. She knew what she would need: money, documents, knowledge. She was thinking 3 steps ahead, just like him, only she was 16. By the end of the second week, everyone on the island had a role. 10 people: Daniel, Amber, Lena, Lena's 3 servants, 4 sailors who had stayed behind from the last caravan because their captain hadn't paid their wages, and they'd decided that a bare island with a strange lord was better than 6 months without pay on a rotten ship. Daniel built. Amber commanded the dock and shore operations. Lena kept the accounts and the treasury. The servants tended the household. The sailors hauled stones and chopped down trees. 10 people. The village's population. He called it a settlement for the first time, not a camp, a settlement. By the middle of the 6th month, he began building a lighthouse, a real lighthouse, not a bonfire on a rock, a stone tower on a granite promontory. The system displayed the blueprint: a round tower, base diameter 6 meters, height 12, walls a meter thick, made of basalt on concrete mortar. a spiral staircase inside, a platform at the top with a windbreak, and a place for a fire. A big one, a constant one, visible from the sea 30 miles away. Rank C allowed for such construction, but by hand, by one person. That would take years of work. Not by one person. He has 10 men, and the system awards experience for what is built according to his blueprint by others. If he personally verified the calculations, he sketched every stone, numbered them, drawn the laying pattern, showed it to Amber, he showed it to the sailors. They looked at the blueprint as if it were witchcraft. None of them had ever seen anything like it. Blueprints didn't exist in this world. The harbor masons built from memory and experience, by eye, roughly. Daniel built from a blueprint. Every stone in its place, every joint the same thickness, every row leveled with a plumb line. They worked for a month, all of them, every day, 10 hours, stone by stone, row after row. The tower grew, slowly but steadily, a meter a week. By the end of the month, the walls had risen 4 meters. And something else happened. On the 20th day of the lighthouse's construction, a ship entered the bay flying a flag Daniel didn't recognize. A silver crescent on a blue field. Amber recognized it immediately. She said it was the flag of the Order of the Seven Winds. A priestly ship. A small, fast boat. It pulled up to the pier. A single man disembarked, an old man in a blue robe with silver embroidery. He asked permission to explore the island. Daniel granted it. The old man walked around the island all day. He looked at the ruins, at the basalt blocks, at the ring of foundations around the bay. He was pale. His hands were shaking. By evening, he returned to Daniel. He said that 3 months ago, the Order had sent a priestess cartographer to this island, a young woman, talented, with the task of finding and describing the ruins. She hadn't returned. He asked if Daniel had seen the young woman. Daniel hadn't. The old man bowed. He thanked him. He left. Daniel remembered. A priestess cartographer. On this island, somewhere. Or had been. He put it aside. Right now, the lighthouse. The lighthouse is more important. A week later, Lena came to him in the evening. He was sitting at the table drawing up plans for the upper part of the lighthouse. She sat down across from him. She was silent. Then she asked why he didn't remember the name of their first horse. A chill ran down his spine. He looked at her. She was looking at him, straight on, without accusation, without tears, just a question. He replied that he had forgotten a lot. The dungeon, exile, solitude. His memory had suffered. She was silent. She looked at him. He could see she didn't believe him, not completely. But she didn't press him. She nodded, stood up, walked to the door, stopped, said the horse's name was Gray. Then she left. He sat at the table, looking at the blueprints, but he didn't see them. Gray. Kale Vesper's first horse, which Daniel Hyun didn't remember because he'd never ridden it. Because he isn't Kale Vesper, and never was. He rested his head on the table. He closed his eyes. For a minute. Just a minute. Then he lifted his head. Then he picked up the charcoal again. Then he continued drawing. The lighthouse wouldn't build itself. Construction continued. 2 weeks after the visit of the priestly ship, Amber found it. Not in the ruins, in the jungle, a kilometer south of the bay, in the crevice between 2 rocks. Amber had gone to gather firewood. She heard a moan. She climbs down. She saw a woman, young, in a blue robe, silver embroidery, 3 braids. She was lying at the bottom of the crevice, unconscious. Her right leg, her thigh, shattered. She'd fallen from the cliff, or been pushed. Next to her were charred pieces of parchment, a map, burned, not completely. She'd burned the map before she fell, or after, so no one would find it. Amber called for Daniel. He ran over. They pulled her out of the crevice with ropes, carefully, slowly. Her leg was bad, worse than Amber's. The thigh, not the shin. The bone was shattered in several places. Swelling, heat, infection. She was unconscious, raving. He carried her back to camp in his arms. 20 minutes. She weighed as much as a child. Laid her down in the house, cleaned the wound, clean water from the aqueduct, over and over. A tub with running water, cold, clean. He changed the bandages every 3 hours. Lena helped, silently, without questions. She fed the woman water from a spoon when she regained consciousness for a second. Amber stood in the doorway and said nothing. 3 days. The fever wouldn't break. The woman was delirious. She spoke in a language Daniel didn't understand. Prayers, names, coordinates, numbers. She was rambling about coordinates. Daniel listened and memorized them. On the 4th day, the fever began to subside. On the 5th, she opened her eyes. Dark, deep, clear. Even after 5 days of delirium and fever, her eyes were clear. She looked at Daniel, then at the ceiling, then at her leg, then back at him. She said her name, Hyun So, a cartographer priestess of the Order of the Seven Winds. She said she had come to the island 3 months ago to search for the ruins of Orn Tal. She found them. She drew a map. And then she realized someone was watching her, someone from the ship anchored off the northern shore. She tried to flee into the jungle. They caught up to her. She burned the map and jumped into a crevice. She landed badly. Her leg. Those who were chasing her looked down. They decided she was dead. They left. She wasn't dead. But in a week at the bottom of the crevice, without water or food, she would have been. She asked who he was. He answered, Kale Vesper. She raised an eyebrow. She said she knew the Vesper family. She knew that the 3rd son had been convicted and exiled. She knew that Silverhook Island was a place of exile. And she sees that where the exile is, there is a pier and a warehouse, and a lighthouse is being built. She said that this was very unusual for someone sentenced to death. He replied that he had been sentenced to exile, not to death, and that the difference was significant. She looked at him for a long time, with that look that he would later recognize, the look of a person who reads not the words, but what lies behind them. She closed her eyes, fell asleep. He left the house, sat down on a rock, looked out at the bay. 14 people on the island. Him, Amber, Lena, 3 servants, 4 sailors. And now, Hyun So. And 3 more fishermen who had landed 2 days ago and stayed because Amber had promised them steady work and a roof over their heads. 14 people. The settlement was growing. Construction of the lighthouse continued. Hyun was recovering more slowly than Amber. A hip isn't a shin, it's harder. It takes longer. She lay in the house, staring at the ceiling and thinking. And watching. She watched Daniel, the way he spoke, the way he moved, the way he built. She heard him talking to himself when he thought no one was listening. She heard words she didn't understand. Standard, coefficient, load, tolerance. She memorized them. By the 3rd week, she asked him to bring her the scraps of the burnt map. He brought them. She laid them out on the bed, glued them together with breadcrumbs. Half the map remained, the southern part of the bay, ruins, drainage channels, and in the corner of the map, a symbol, small, round, with 4 lines radiating from the center. She said it was a sign, the symbol of the architect Orn, the one who built Orn Tal. She said the order had been searching for this symbol for 5 centuries, and that she had found it, and that those who had come after her were also looking for it. She didn't say who they were. Daniel didn't ask. Not yet. The lighthouse was growing. 8 meters, 10. By the end of the 7th month, 12 meters. The final row of masonry. A platform at the top. A windbreak. A place for a fire. He climbed to the top, alone, in the evening. He stood on the platform and looked down. The bay lay at his feet, silver in the sunset light. The docks, the warehouses, the house. The settlement of 10 huts that fishermen and sailors had built around his first home. Smoke from the fires. Voices. Life. He lit the beacon, the first real fire in the stone tower on Silverhook Island. The light struck the darkening sky, bright, steady, constant, visible 30 miles away. Someone below cried out, then another. He looked down. People stood on the shore and looked at the lighthouse, at the light. 14 people, fishermen, sailors, servants. Lena in a dark dress, Amber with a cleaver, Hyun on the crutches he'd made for her. They were looking at the light. Some were crossing themselves. A fisherman named Norm dropped to his knees. Amber didn't cross herself. Amber looked at the lighthouse, then at Daniel at the top of the lighthouse. Even from a height of 12 meters, he could see her face. He couldn't read it, but he could see that she wasn't looking away. The system flashed. Construction complete. The lighthouse. Rank upgraded, from C to B. He stood atop the lighthouse in the warm breeze from the sea, looking at the light and the people below, and at the bay and the sea stretching toward the horizon. 7 months ago, he had woken up on this beach with a barrel of water and a knife. Now he had a lighthouse. After the lighthouse was lit, ships began to arrive, not one at a time, in groups. The light on the cape served as a signal to every captain within a 30-mile radius. A safe harbor, clean water, repairs. In the first 2 weeks of the 8th month, 9 ships entered the bay. 3 merchant barges from Velros, 2 fishing boats from the nearby islands, 1 heavy freighter from Aradin carrying silk and spices, and 3 small ships without flags. Smugglers, or former pirates, or both. Amber met every ship at the dock, with a cutlass on her belt and a list of rules on a small board. Daniel had written the rules himself. Lena translated them into 4 languages. 1 silver coin per day for mooring. Water is free. Repairs by contract. Weapons must be sheathed on shore. Fights at the docks are punishable by expulsion. Murder is punishable by death. Simple, clear, harsh. The first conflict happened on the 3rd day. 2 sailors from an Aradin freighter got into a fight with a smuggler over a spot by the well. Although there was no well, there was an aqueduct. There was enough water for everyone, but they weren't fighting over water. They were fighting because they could. Because on a small island with no guards and no prison, who's going to stop them? Amber stopped them. She stepped between them, with a cutlass in her hand. Not swinging it, just holding it. And she said that the next person to raise a hand on port grounds would be swimming home without a ship. They looked at her, at the cleaver, at the scar across her eyebrow, at the lame leg that somehow made her no less dangerous, but more so. They dispersed. Daniel watched from above, from the lighthouse platform. He thought he needed a guard, a real one, not just one limping woman with a cutlass, no matter how scary she was. He spoke with Amber that evening. She said that among the sailors who had stayed on the island, there were 4 she trusted, strong, reliable, skilled with weapons. She said she could organize a patrol out of them. He told her to, and she did. By the end of the week, Silverhook had a harbor guard, 4 men, armed with cleavers and clubs, in a makeshift uniform of identical blue armbands. Blue, the color of the Vespers. Lena insisted. Michaela Rain showed up right then, Captain Tobias's daughter, petite, blonde, freckled, loud.
She stepped off her father's ship, and the first thing she did was count all the ships in the bay.
Then all the barrels in the storerooms. Then all the coins in the cash register. She did it in half an hour. Daniel hadn't asked her to. She just looked at his ledger and said it was a mess. Lena looked at her with cold, aristocratic dignity and said that she kept the ledger and that everything was correct. Mickey looked at Lena. Lena looked at Mickey. The air between them buzzed. Then Mick pointed her finger at the third line of a ledger and said there was a mistake of 2 silver coins. Lena looked. She was silent. It was a mistake. Lena wasn't used to making mistakes. Mickey wasn't used to keeping quiet about mistakes. Daniel stood between them and thought this would either be the best team in accounting history or a war. Captain Tobias took Daniel aside. He said his daughter wanted to stay. He said she was 10 times smarter than him and a better negotiator than any merchant in Velros. Daniel was building the third one, 40 fathoms, the longest, built on a solid imperial foundation, basalt, concrete, a wooden deck made of hardwoods cut from the island's inner slopes. 20 men worked under his supervision, sailors who'd stayed behind from the ships, fishermen who'd washed up on the island, 2 carpenters who'd arrived on a merchant vessel and whom Daniel had offered permanent work in exchange for silver and shelter. He drew the plans. They built. The system awarded experience points for every stone laid according to his blueprint, provided that he personally verified the calculations. He checked. Every evening he walked the construction site, every stone, every joint, every corner. If he found a mistake, they'd redo it in the morning. No exceptions. The builders grumbled. Then they stopped, because not a single wall Daniel had checked had cracked, not one. And the walls built by other masons in the ports of Velros cracked after 2 years. They didn't know why. He knew. Hyun was recovering, slowly. Her leg was healing crookedly, like Amber's. She would limp, but she walked, with 2 crutches, then with 1, then with a cane. She walked around the island with a cane and looked at the ruins, at the stones, at the signs she was looking for. Daniel saw her at dawn by the southern cliff. He saw her at noon by the drainage ditches. He saw her in the evening at the base of the lighthouse. She ran her fingers over the stones and whispered. One evening she came to him. He was sitting on the lighthouse platform. She climbed the spiral staircase, slowly, with a cane. Every step was a struggle for her, but she made it up. She sat down beside him. She was silent. She looked out at the bay. Then she said that he wasn't Kale Vesper. He didn't answer. He didn't move. He just stopped breathing for a second. Then he inhaled. She said that Kale Vesper had been educated at the Northern Castle. Northern nobles study horsemanship and fencing and heraldry. They don't learn to build docks. They don't know the words he uses when he thinks no one is listening. She doesn't know what a coefficient is, but she knows that word isn't from this world. He was silent. The wind rustled. The lighthouse fire crackled behind them. She said she didn't care who he was. She said he had saved her life, that he was building a port that would give a home to hundreds of people, that he cared for the girl who considered him a brother with a tenderness she had never seen in 24 years. She said that was enough for her. She wouldn't ask. She wouldn't tell. But she wanted him to know that she knew. And that it doesn't change anything. He sat and looked out at the bay, silver in the moonlight. 14 ships at the docks, lights in the village windows, smoke from campfires. And sitting next to him was a woman who knew his secret and had decided that the secret didn't matter. He said thank you. She nodded. They sat in silence at the top of the lighthouse for another hour. Then she went down. He stayed. And for the first time in 8 months in this world, he felt that he wasn't alone. Not in the sense of people around him. There were already plenty of people. In the sense that someone knew who he really was. and hadn't turned away. The next day he began building a temple, a small one, on a rock above the lighthouse, with an open dome, with a compass rose on the floor laid out with tiles found in the ruins. 4 walls, 4 windows facing the 4 cardinal directions. No doors. The Temple of the 7 Winds. For Hyun. He didn't tell her why he was building it. She didn't ask. She stood below and watched the walls rise, saying nothing. When he finished, 10 days later, she climbed up there alone, with a cane, slowly. She entered. She stood in the center, on the compass rose. She looked up at the open dome, the sky, the wind, the clouds. She stood and watched, and he saw from below how her shoulders slumped, how the tension she had held inside for months flowed out of her, how she sank to her knees and prayed. For the first time in a long time, not by order, not out of duty, because she wanted to. He turned away. It wasn't for his eyes. Meanwhile, Mickey was turning into a force of nature. By the middle of the 9th month, Daniel had appointed her head of customs, a position no woman had ever held in this world. Mickey didn't bat an eye. She sat down in the small booth on the pier that Daniel had built in half a day and began inspecting the cargo. Every crate, every barrel, every sack. She knew the prices of everything. Where from? She was a merchant's daughter and had grown up on the deck of a cargo ship since she was 6. She knew that a sack of Aridine spices was worth 4 times as much in Velros. She knew that northern iron was valued 3 times as much in the south. She charged a port fee not as a single silver coin, but as a percentage of the cargo's value. It was smarter. It was fairer.
And it brought in 5 times more to the treasury than the old system. Lena was impressed. She didn't say so, but Daniel saw how she looked at Mickey, with respect, with annoyance, with something resembled envy. The 2 smartest girls on the island, one a noblewoman who spoke 6 languages and knew maritime law, the other a merchant's daughter with freckles and a perfect memory for numbers. They began working together, not right away, through arguments and silence and more arguments. But they began. By the 10th month, Silverhook's treasury amounted to 420 silver and 11 gold. Daniel knew this because Lena reported it to him every evening. Exactly, down to the coin. He nodded. He didn't understand the value of these numbers. In his past life, 400 silver coins was pocket money. Here, it was a fortune. Lena explained. For 400 silver coins, you could buy a small merchant ship, or hire 40 workers for 3 months, or provide the settlement with food for half a year. He looked at the numbers with new eyes. The settlement grew. 30 people by the end of the 9th month, 40 by the middle of the 10th. People came off the ships and stayed. Fishermen who were tired of paying tribute to pirates. Carpenters looking for work. A blacksmith fleeing his debts. A cook from a sunken merchant ship. 2 laundresses from an islet that had been flooded. Everyone came with their own story. Everyone was given a place, a hut, a job, silver for their work, and most importantly, safety. The lighthouse burned every night. Guards patrolled the docks. Rules were followed. For the first time in their lives, many of these people lived in a place where rules existed and worked. Daniel watched this and thought. He was building a port, but what he ended up with was a city. In the 10th month, Daniel bought a person. He hadn't planned to. He didn't believe in slavery, neither in his past life nor in this one. But a merchant ship from the northern territories brought a cargo of iron, and along with the iron, 6 slaves. 4 men, 1 woman, 1 teenager. The captain unloaded them onto the dock like cargo, next to the barrels and bales. Daniel stood on the dock and watched. 6 people with ropes around their wrists, dirty, skinny, with empty eyes. 5 of them were staring at the ground. 1 looked at him.
The teenager. Short, skinny. Hands burned, bangs cut crookedly with a knife. She looked at him from under her brows, not with a plea, not with fear, with something like a challenge. He asked the captain the price. The captain named his price. 12 silver pieces for all of them, or 3 for the boy blacksmith. Daniel looked at the teenager again. Not a boy, a girl. He could tell by the line of her jaw and the width of her shoulders. The captain apparently hadn't noticed or didn't care. He said 12 silver pieces for the 6 of, and 1 wooden ruler. The captain looked at him as if he were crazy. What kind of ruler? Daniel pulled a wooden slat from behind his belt, with markings carved into it with a knife. He had made it during his first week, a measuring ruler, accurate to the millimeter. He knew that in this world, standard units of length did not exist. Every port measured things its own way. His ruler was the first accurate measuring tool within a 300-mile radius. The captain took the ruler, turned it over in his hands. Didn't get it. Shrugged, took the 12 silver coins and the ruler, left. 6 slaves stood on the pier, with ropes around their wrists. Daniel approached, cut the ropes with his knife. All 6. They stood and looked at their free hands. 4 men, bewildered, the woman silent. The teenager with burns on his hands looked up from under his brow. He said they were free, that they could stay on the island or leave on the first ship, that if they stayed there would be work and a roof over their heads and food. 4 men stayed. 2 went fishing. 2 went to work on the construction site. The woman left on the very first ship a week later. The teenager stayed. Chi von Pak, 19 years old. She looked 15, from a wandering clan of northern armorers, a blacksmith's apprentice. They kept her at the forge as bellows hands, pumping bellows 12 hours a day, every day, since she was 10. She knew metal, knew fire, knew alloys, but they never gave her a hammer, because a woman at the forge is a disgrace. On her first day of freedom, she walked up to him, asked what she should do. He told her whatever he wanted. She stood there and looked at him, silently. Then her face twisted. She began to cry, quietly, soundlessly. Only tears streamed down her dirty cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. She didn't know what she wanted. No one had ever asked. He waited. She wiped her face with her sleeve, looked at her hands, burned, calloused from the bellows. She said she wanted to forge. He nodded. He didn't have a forge. For now. 3 days later, he began building a forge. Not a small one, a big one, with 3 furnaces, because the system had shown him the blueprint, and because a forge was what the port needed most of all: nails, staples, hinges, hooks, anchor chains. All of this was bought from merchants for silver. His own smithy meant his own iron, and his own iron meant independence. He built the smithy in 2 weeks. Stone walls, 3 furnaces made of raw brick and fire clay, chimneys, and, most importantly, a water hammer. He designed it in 1 evening, simple but effective. A branch from the aqueduct turns a wooden wheel. The wheel lifts the hammer on the camshaft. The hammer falls, 20 blows per minute. No muscle power required. Chi-won looked at the water hammer as if it were a miracle. She stood next to it, watching the falling hammer, and tears streamed down her face. The second time, not from grief, from understanding, that everything had changed, that she would never pump bellows again. That she had a hammer that worked on its own, that she had 3 forges, that she had a workshop. He told her her name would be above the door. She looked at him. He saw that she didn't understand. He explained. She would forge the letters of her name, out of iron, as her first piece of work, and he would hang them above the smithy door, because it was her smithy. She, the master, she decides. She didn't answer. She turned away. She went to the forge. She stoked the fire. She placed the first piece of iron on the anvil and began to forge. He left. He didn't watch. It wasn't meant for his eyes. 3 days later, the forged letters hung above the smithy door. Chiwon Park. Rough, uneven, a first work, but made of iron. Real. Rachel Dupree appeared quietly, just as a spy should. 10 months in, on a merchant ship from Velros, under the guise of a freelance card player. Daniel noticed her on the first day, not because she was beautiful. She was. Short, dark hair, long fingers, an expensive black dress that she wore on the construction site as if it were normal. He noticed her because she was watching. Not the harbor, not at the lighthouse, not at the ships, at the people. She was looking at Amber and counting the guards, at Lena and examining the documents on the table, at Mickey, memorizing the numbers she called out, at Hyun, lingering on the silver embroidery of her medal, at every person in the port, and giving each one a mental assessment. He knew that look. In his past life, auditors looked that way, and inspectors, and competitors sent to find out why his project was ahead of schedule. She wasn't here for the maps. She was here on someone's orders. He approached her that evening. She was sitting in the tavern. The tavern. He had built it a month ago, a single-story building with stone walls and a long wooden counter. Not because he liked to drink, because a tavern is a place where people talk. And where people talk, that's where the economy is born. She was sitting at a corner table, alone, with a mug of something the local cook had brewed from fermented fruit. He sat across from her. He asked if there was a draft coming through her window. She looked at him, slowly, with a hint of surprise. She had expected an interrogation, or an accusation, or a bargain. She got a question about a draft. She replied that there was one. He said he would seal the gap tomorrow. She looked at him. He could see her weighing her options in her head. A game, a trap, manipulation, naivety. None of the options fit. He wasn't playing a game. He really was asking about the draft. Because he had installed the windows in the guest rooms himself and knew that the third one from the left didn't close properly. He stood up, said goodnight, left. She sat there, watching him go. 3 weeks later, he built her an observation room on the top floor of the lighthouse. A small room, a table, a chair, a wall-to-wall window overlooking the bay. He told her it would make her work more comfortable. She asked what he meant. He replied that she was watching every ship and every person in the harbor, and that it was easier to do so from up high than from a tavern. She was silent. He saw something inside her break. Not loudly, quietly, like glass that cracks from heat rather than from a blow. She asked if he knew who she was. He replied that he had a hunch. Velros intelligence, or Aradine's, or the Northern League's. It didn't matter. She's here. She has eyes and a brain. He needs both. She asked what if she was here to destroy him. He replied that if she wanted to destroy him, she wouldn't have sat in a tavern for 3 weeks. She would have done it already. So she's either hesitating or she likes it here. He prefers the latter. She didn't answer, but she took the key to the office, and she stayed. By the 11th month, Silverhook was a different place. 3 docks, a lighthouse, 4 warehouses, a smithy, a tavern, a guest house, 20 cottages, a navigation school. He built it for Amber, for her 27th birthday. A stone building, 1 large room, with a map of the bay on the wall, with charts of the currents, with wooden models of ships, with her name above the door. Amber Kane. The navigation school. She stood in front of the door and looked at her name and was silent for a long time. Then she turned to him, her eyes wet. She said that no one ever had, and fell silent. She didn't finish. He didn't wait for her to finish. He knew. No one had ever put her name on anything. Not on a single building. Not on a single document. Not on a single ship. She was a navigator's assistant, invisible, replaceable, a voice that was ignored because it belonged to a woman. She turned away, wiped her eyes, and went into the school. And an hour later, she was already yelling at 3 fishermen who were confusing starboard with port. At the end of the 11th month, Remington's ships arrived. 3 vessels, flying the flag of the Northern League. Military, not merchant. Narrow, fast, with catapults on the decks and armored infantry at the gunwales. They appeared on the horizon in the morning. Amber was the first to see them, from the lighthouse platform. She ran down, on her lame leg, down the spiral staircase. It cost her a scraped knee and 10 seconds, during which she cursed herself for being soft. She found Daniel at the 3rd pier. He was checking the seams on the new section. She said, 3 ships, military, the Northern League. He straightened up, wiped his hands on his shirt, looked at the horizon. 3 sails, gray, with a coat of arms he knew from Cale's memory. House Vesper. A silver falcon on a blue field. Remington. He had been thinking about this moment for the past 5 months, ever since the first fisherman brought word that someone on Silverhook was building docks. He knew the rumor would reach the mainland, knew Remington would hear it, knew he would come.
The question was when. The answer? Now. He looked at his port, 3 docks, a lighthouse, 4 warehouses, a smithy, a tavern, 30 houses, a navigation school, a temple, the bay's walls. 300 people, 40 of them armed, under Amber's command. He wasn't building a fortress. He was building a port. But a port can be defended, not with swords, with the law. He turned to Lena. She was already beside him, pale, with hard eyes. She had seen the coat of arms, too. She knew who was coming. Her cousin, the one who forged the letters and sent her brother to his death. She clenched her fists. He placed a hand on her shoulder, told her everything would be all right. She looked up at him. She didn't believe him, but she nodded. Daniel didn't prepare for battle. He prepared for a reception. He ordered Mickey to prepare a complete ledger of the port's revenues for the past 5 months. He ordered Lena to fetch a copy of the Velros Maritime Code. He ordered Amber to post guards on the docks, not with weapons drawn, with weapons sheathed, as usual, just like every day. He ordered Rachel to go up to the office in the lighthouse and keep watch. He ordered Hyun to light the temple fire, the sign of the 7 winds. Any sailor from the Northern League would think twice before attacking a port under the protection of the winds. Then he entered the reception room. The reception room. He had built it a month ago, not large, but impressive. Stone walls of light basalt, dark wooden ceiling, tall windows overlooking the bay, a long table, 8 chairs. On the wall, a map of the Emerald Sea that Hyun had reconstructed from memory. He sat down at the table and waited. The ships entered the bay an hour later, slowly, carefully. The captain of the lead vessel sounded the depth with a lead line, just as everyone who entered here for the first time did. Daniel knew what they had seen. The depth. 12 meters at the entrance, a clear seabed, calm waters. 3 docks with bollards, a lighthouse, warehouses, a settlement, smoke from the smithy, people on the shore. A port. A real port. Right where, according to their data, there should be bare rock and the bones of the dead. The lead ship pulled up to the first dock. An officer steps down from the deck, in chainmail, with a sword. He surveyed the pier. Guards with blue armbands, Amber with a cutlass at her belt. He looked at her with surprise, not hostility. Surprise. He asked permission to moor on behalf of Lord Remington Vesper. Amber looked at Daniel. He was standing on the upper pier in a plain work shirt with concrete dust on his hands. He shook his head. No. Amber turned to the officer. She said mooring was impossible.
The piers were occupied. The officer looked at the piers. 2 ships were at the first, 3 at the second. The third was empty. He pointed to the third one. Amber said that the third pier was reserved for an expected trade caravan. The officer flushed. He said that Lord Remington Vesper, heir to the House of Vesper of the Northern League, demanded a berth in the port located on lands belonging to the House of Vesper. Amber looked at him, then at Daniel. Daniel came down, slowly down the steps. He approached, stood next to Amber, looked at the officer. He said that Silverhook Island had been declared a free port 3 months ago, that the Protectorate of the Republic of Velros was confirmed by a document bearing the seal of the Meriden Trading House, that the lands of the free port did not belong to any house. That mooring was on a general basis at the standard rate upon presentation of ship's documents and payment of port fees. The officer listened. His expression shifted, from surprise to irritation, from irritation to anger, from anger to bewilderment. He hadn't expected this. He had expected a barren island and a dead exile. Instead, he found a port with rules and laws and documents and guards. He went back to the ship. 10 minutes later, another man came down from the deck, a young man, 27, tall, broad-shouldered, in an expensive blue doublet with a silver falcon on the chest, blonde hair, cold eyes, a handsome face with the expression of a man who was used to getting everything he wanted. Remington Vesper, Cale's cousin, the one who forged the letters, the one who sent him to this island. Cale's memory flared up, vivid, painful. Remington in the library, Remington on the hunt, Remington at the dinner table, smiling, charming, with venom in every word. Daniel suppressed that memory, not his, not now. Remington stepped onto the pier, looked around, looked at the lighthouse, at the warehouses, at the village, at the people, at the guard, at the blacksmith shop,
At the tavern, at the navigation school, at Daniel. Daniel stood before him, in a work shirt, with concrete dust on his hands, with a builder's calluses. Remington didn't recognize him. 11 months on the island, the sun, physical labor, 10 hours a day. His body had changed. His face had changed. The aristocratic pallor had given way to a tan. His soft features had hardened. Hands, different hands, not reins, stone and wood and concrete. Remington looked at him and did not see his cousin. He saw the lord of the port, young, harsh, a stranger. Remington introduced himself by his full title, heir to the House of Vesper, authorized inspector of the Northern League, arrived to verify the status of Cale Vesper, the house's third son in exile. Daniel listened. His face did not change, not one iota. He introduced himself. Cale Vesper, Lord of Silverhook Port. Remington blinked. Once. Then again. Then his face turned deathly pale. He looked at Daniel, recognizing him, slowly, piece by piece. The eyes, the jawline, the height. A slow, terrifying recognition. Silence. 5 seconds. 10. No one on the pier was breathing. Amber stood next to the cleaver. The guard stood behind her. Lena stood on the upper pier, white as paper, hands clenched. Daniel didn't look away. He looked at his cousin, at the man who had destroyed Cale Vesper's life for the sake of an inheritance. And he felt no hatred, no anger. He felt what an engineer feels when looking at a poorly designed building. Disappointment. Remington pulled himself together, quickly. He was smart. He said he was glad to see his cousin alive. His voice was steady. His face was under control. Only the pallor of his skin gave him away. He said he had come to make sure his exiled relative was well. Daniel nodded. He invited Remington into the reception room for talks. Remington entered. He saw a table, a map on the wall, windows overlooking the bay. Lena at the table with documents.
he saw Lena and froze. She was sitting in a dress in the colors of the Vesper house, blue and silver, with her back perfectly straight, with eyes that burned with such fire that Remington took half a step back. She didn't say a word to him. She just looked. That was enough. Daniel sat down at the table. Remington sat across from him. Documents lay between them. The Velros Protectorate, port regulations, ship registry, financial reports. Lena had laid them out in advance, every document in its place, like stones in a wall. Daniel didn't accuse, he didn't threaten, he didn't demand. He said that the House of Vespers needed a new port, that the old ports of the Northern League were silting up, that the new generation of merchant ships couldn't enter the shallow harbors, that Silverhook solved this problem, that the terms of the trade agreement lay before Remington, and that he should read them. Remington read. His face changed. The terms were harsh, but fair. The House of Vespers received priority mooring and a reduced tariff. Silverhook received recognition and protection. Mutual benefit. Clear. As clear as day. Remington looked up. He asked what Cale really wanted. Daniel looked at him for a long time. Then he stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the bay, at the docks, at the ships, at the lighthouse, at the people, at the light on the water. He replied that he wanted the House of Vespers to sign the agreement. Nothing more. Remington didn't understand. Daniel could see it. Remington was expecting revenge, expecting an ultimatum, expecting a knife in the back. Because that's what he himself would have done. But what he got was a trade agreement. Remington signed it. His hand didn't tremble. He was too proud to tremble. But Daniel saw his pupils, dilated, like a man who realized he had lost and didn't understand how. Remington left. 3 ships sailed out of the bay. The gray sails faded into the horizon. Daniel stood on the pier and watched. Member approached. She stood beside him, silently. Then she squeezed his sleeve. He looked at her. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking out to sea, but her fingers were holding his sleeve, tightly. Lena came down from the parlor. She approached. She stood on the other side. She looked at the horizon, then at Daniel, and she smiled. For the first time in 11 months. So her face changed completely, and she no longer looked like a child playing at being an adult, but like a person who was finally home. Hyun stood by the temple on the cliff. She looked down from above. She was silent. Mickey sat in the customs booth and calculated the losses from 3 hours of dock downtime. Chi-Wan was forging nails in the smithy and didn't even realize that ships had arrived.
Rachel looked out from her office in the lighthouse and wrote a long letter to Velros. It was the first day of winter. The first snow was falling on the docks. Ma light was on. Winter in the Emerald Sea was mild. No frost, no ice, just colder winds, more rain, higher waves. Ships came less often, but they did come. The lighthouse was lit every night. The port was operating. Daniel used the winter for what engineers always use the lull for construction. He started with the shipyard, not a big one for a single vessel, a place for keel laying and hull repairs, a covered shed over a dry dock next to the second pier, wooden skids for pulling ships ashore. The system displayed the blueprint. Rank B allowed for a shipyard. It took 3 weeks to build, with 20 workers. By the end of the 3rd week, the first ship was pulled ashore for bottom repairs, a small fishing boat. But that was the beginning. At the same time, he was designing something that would change everything. A dry dock. Not that primitive contraption with skids, a real dry dock, with stone walls, with lock gates, with a tidal drainage system. The idea was simple. The bay had a tidal range of 1.5 meters. If you carved a basin into the rock below low tide, if you installed sluice gates at the entrance, if you let the ship in at high tide,
if you closed the gates, if you waited for low tide. The water would drain on its own. The ship would sit on keel blocks, a dry dock. No pumps, no machinery, just the tide, just the moon, just gravity. He sketched every evening, for weeks, dimensions, angles, wall thickness, calculating the water pressure on the gates, calculating the load on the keel blocks. Every number in his head, no calculator, no computer. 12 years of education. Hyun came in the evenings. She sat in the corner. She watched him draw. Sometimes they talked about maps, about the stars, about ruins. She told him about the Orn Empire, what the Order knew. Fragments, legends, facts mixed with myths. Orn was a maritime empire like the Venice of his world, only bigger. 1,000 islands under one flag. The best ports in the world, the best ships, the best engineers. And then, overnight, it all vanished. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't conquered. It vanished, as if someone had wiped the empire off the map. The ports were deserted. The cities were empty. The ships remained moored at the docks with tables set and candles burning, and not a single person on board. She said the Order believes that Orn was destroyed by something from beneath the water, something they awakened while digging the foundations for their ports, something that had been sleeping at the bottom of the sea and didn't like being disturbed. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He remembered that the system had called itself a legacy, that Orn's last architect had woven his experience into the stones of this island, that the system would awaken for whoever found themselves here alone and began to build. He didn't tell Hyun about this, not yet, but he thought, if something had destroyed Orna, and if that something was connected to ports and construction, and if he was building a port on the ruins of Orna's main port, then he put that thought aside. Not now. Right now, the dry dock. Construction of the dock began in the first days of the new year, the 12th month on the island. 30 workers, pickaxes made of iron forged by Chi Wan, wheelbarrows, ropes. They were chipping away at the rock, by hand, following the blueprint. Every blow of the pickaxe in the right spot, every chipped-off piece the right size. The system guided them, but the hands were human, and the rock was hard. Basalt, the same as in the ruins of Orna, dense, heavy, not giving in without a fight. They worked for a month. A basin 20 meters long, 10 wide, 3 meters deep, carved out of the rock, walls lined with concrete. The bottom leveled, oak keel blocks installed along the center line, an entrance channel 6 meters wide, and the gates. The gates were the main problem. Wooden, double leaf, each leaf 3 meters by 3, weighing about a ton. They had to withstand the pressure of the water at high tide. Chi Wan spent 2 weeks forging the hinges, massive, iron, each as thick as an arm. Carpenters sheathed the oak frames with 3 layers of planks, with a layer of tar between each layer. Daniel checked every seam, every hinge, every bolt. When the gate was ready, they hoisted it into place. 10 men, 2 days, with blocks and ropes and curses, and then the gates stood, tight, even. He closed them to test them. The leaves came together with a dull thud. The gap between them was less than a finger's width. He filled the gap with resin. 0. They waited for high tide. The water rose. It filled the basin through the open gates. Daniel closed the gates, barred them with a bolt. They waited for the ebb. 6 hours. The water behind the gates receded. The water in the basin remained. A drop. A drop. A thin trickle from under the gates. He measured it. A liter a minute. Acceptable. Self-draining with a bucket. For the first dry dock in this world, it's perfect. He stood at the edge of the empty basin and looked down. Stone walls, a flat bottom, keel blocks, the smell of wet stone and the sea. The first dry dock in Tal Marine in 500 years. The last one was built by Orna's engineers. Now it was his turn. The system flashed. Construction complete. Experience earned. A massive amount. Progress toward rank A was 1/3 complete for a single project. Amber stood beside him. She looked into the basin, then at him. She said 2 words. "Your move." He didn't understand. She explained. Word of the dry dock would spread across the entire Emerald Sea within a month. Every captain with a rotting hull or a loose keel would know there was one place where a ship could be hauled out and properly repaired. One place. His. That changes everything. It's not just a port. It's a monopoly. He looked at her. She was right. Again. He thought of Yusuf ibn Rashid, the Aradeen Sea Lord Tobias had told him about, the 1,000-ton flagship, which could only be repaired in 3 ports in the world. Now 4. The 12th month had ended. A year. A whole year on the island. Daniel stood on the lighthouse on the night of the anniversary, alone, looking down. The port lay beneath him, glowing, alive. 3 piers, the lighthouse, the shipyard, the dry dock, 4 warehouses, the smithy, the tavern, the guest house, the navigation school, the temple. 30 residential buildings, the infirmary. He had built the infirmary a month ago, for Hyun. Not because she was sick, because she healed. She knew herbs, knew poultices, knew how to bring down a fever and how to clean a wound and how to set a splint. Better than him. Much better. He built her a bright, clean building with 3 beds and running water from the aqueduct and windows facing the bay. 312 people lived in the settlement. 50 were employed at the port full-time. The rest fished, traded, built, and lived. Everyone had a roof over their head. Work, food, law. He stood on the lighthouse and counted. Not people, not money. Buildings. He remembered every building in Silverhook, every stone, every joint. And each one had been built for someone specific. The aqueduct for a wounded man he hadn't met yet. The warehouses for merchants who hadn't arrived yet. A lighthouse for ships still at sea. A navigation school for Amber. A temple for Hyun. A smithy for Chi-Wan. An infirmary for those who would arrive sick. A tavern for those who would arrive alone. Docks for those who would arrive weary. He wasn't building a port. He was building a place for every single person who needed it. The port was a side effect. He never said this out loud, but standing on the lighthouse on the anniversary of his arrival, he allowed himself to think it. And he smiled. For the first time in a long time. Not out of joy, out of exhaustion, out of pride. Out of the quiet, deep satisfaction of an engineer who sees his project completed. Voices could be heard from below. Amber was cursing the night watch. Mickey was counting on her fingers. Lena was writing by candlelight. Chi-Wan was hammering away in the smithy because the concept of a night shift didn't exist for her. Rachel stood by the study window and gazed at the same stars. Somewhere in the infirmary, Hyun was changing the bandage on a fisherman who had cut his hand that morning. His people, his port, his home. A year ago, he had a knife and a barrel of water. In the 2nd month of the 2nd year, Yusuf ibn Rashid arrived. A trading caravan of 5 ships from Aradeen, red sails with gold trim, silk, spices, incense, gold. The flagship was enormous, 3 masts, 3 decks, displacement of about 1,000 tons. By the standards of this world, it was a battleship. By Daniel's standards, it was a small coastal freighter. But here it was the largest ship that had ever entered Silverhook Bay. A storm had battered the caravan 3 days ago. The sails were torn, the rigging was damaged. The flagship was the worst off. The rudder blade was cracked. The hull below the waterline was battered. A leak, not critical. But without repairs, they wouldn't make it to Velros. Yusuf ibn Rashid stepped off the ship. Tall, dark-skinned, a graying beard neatly trimmed. His clothes were white, clean, even after the storm. Daniel didn't understand how he did it. Dark eyes, proud. The eyes of a man who had commanded a merchant fleet for 20 years and was accustomed to the sea parting before him. He surveyed the port, the docks, the lighthouse, the warehouses. He looked like a man accustomed to seeing the world's finest ports and knowing that what he was being shown was not the best. He looked at Daniel. Young, tanned, in work clothes. Yusuf asked if the flagship could be repaired. Daniel asked what the ship's draft was. Yusuf replied, 4 meters. Daniel looked at the dry dock. The basin was 3 meters deep, 1 meter short. But at high tide, the depth at the dock entrance is 5.5 meters, enough to bring it in. And at low tide, the ship would sit on the keel blocks with room to spare. He said it was possible. Yusuf asked how many days it would take. Daniel inspected the damage. Rudder blade, replacement. Plating below the waterline. Patches. Caulking. Rigging. Replacement of ropes. Repair of blocks. He calculated. 9 days. Yusuf looked at him. With disbelief. In the 3 ports of the world where they repair such ships, it takes at least a month. Daniel said 9 days. The price? 200 gold pieces, and 1 map of the eastern reefs. Yusuf was silent. 200 gold pieces is a lot. 1 map is... He understood. This young man isn't asking for money. He's asking for knowledge. A map of the reefs that the Aradine pilots guard as a state secret. Because whoever knows the reefs knows the safe route. And whoever knows the safe route controls trade. Yusuf looked at Daniel again, more closely. This boy understands what he is asking for. He agreed. Daniel led him to the dry dock, in silence, up the stone steps carved into the rock. Yusuf looked at the basin, at the walls, at the keel blocks, at the gates. He stopped. Daniel saw his knuckles turn white. Yusuf had traveled the world for 30 years. He had seen the docks of Aradine, Velros, the Northern League. He had never seen anything like this. A stone basin carved into the rock. The lock gates, tidal drainage. It was different. Not better, not worse, just from a different era. As if a man from the future had built something 1,000 years ahead of his time. Yusuf turned silently to Daniel. He asked who had designed it. Daniel replied that he had. Yusuf didn't believe him. Daniel didn't try to convince him. He steered the flagship into the dock on the morning tide. The ship entered, tightly, with a meter of clearance on either side. The gates closed. 6 hours of waiting. The water receded. The ship settled onto its keel blocks. Yusuf stood at the edge of the basin and looked at his vessel, at the exposed hull, at the damage that was now fully visible, at the workers who were already coming down the ladders with their tools. Chi-Wan was forging a new rudder blade, massive, from the finest iron, with the grain correctly aligned in the wooden shaft. Daniel had checked the blueprint himself. The carpenters were caulking and tarring, according to his markings. Every plank, every joint. The riggers were replacing the ropes and blocks. Work went on from dawn to dusk, non-stop. Yusuf walked around the port for 9 days. He talked to people, to fishermen, to merchants, with the guards. With Mickey, who gave him a tour of customs with such pride as if she were showing off a palace. With Hyun, who told him the story of the ruins exactly as much as she wanted to tell, and not a word more. With Amber, who explained the port rules to him in a tone that brooked no objections from the Sea Lord or anyone else. He ate at the tavern, drank the local swill, walked to the lighthouse in the evenings, watched the light. On the 10th day, the flagship left the dock on the morning tide. The gates opened, water filled the basin, the ship surfaced. They towed it out. It stood at the pier, repaired, refurbished, with a new rudder blade, with a newly caulked hull, with new rigging. 9 days, just as promised. Yusuf ibn Rashid stood at the pier. His crew was loading supplies. The other 4 ships of the caravan had already left the bay and were waiting beyond the cape. He looked at Daniel, silently, for a long time. Then he did something he had never done in his life. He bowed. To the waist, deeply, in public, in front of the entire crew, the dock workers, the guards, Mickey, his mouth agape, in front of Amber, raising an eyebrow, in front of Lena, who was writing down every word. He named Daniel Lord of the Port and said that if he ever needed Aradine, Aradine was his. Daniel stood and accepted the bow, without moving, without smiling, not answering. He just stood there. And at that moment, every person on the pier understood. It had already happened. The boy, with a knife and a barrel of water on a deserted island, had become the man to whom the Sea Lord of Aradine bowed. Not out of fear, not out of calculation, out of respect, for his skill, for what he had seen in 9 days in a port that shouldn't exist. Yusuf straightened up. He pulled a scroll from his bosom. He handed it to Daniel, a map of the eastern reefs, Aradina's state secret, drawn on silk, with coordinates, with depths, with current directions. He said this map was worth more than 200 gold pieces, and that he was happy to pay. Daniel took the map, unfolded it, looked at it. Lines, numbers, markings. He saw them simultaneously through the eyes of an engineer from Incheon and through the eyes of the Lord of Silverhook Port. He saw trade routes. He saw opportunities. He saw the future. Yusuf left. The red sails with gold faded into the horizon. Daniel stood on the pier with the map in his hands and watched them go. Rachel approached, quietly, as always. She said that news of the Aradin Sea Lord's bow would reach Velros in 2 weeks, the Northern League in 3, the Aradin Sultanate in 4. In 2 months, every trading house in Talmarine would know the name Silverhook. He nodded. She said that was good and dangerous. Kyron Moores, pirate admiral, the man who controls half the trade routes in the southern part of the Emerald Sea, a deep-water harbor at this crossroads of winds, would bring his entire pirate economy crashing down. He wouldn't sit idly by. Daniel knew it. He'd been thinking about it since the first month. Kyron would come. The question wasn't if, it was when. He looked at the bay, at the walls, at the headlands, at the wind. He already knew what he would build. Preparations for the siege took 3 weeks. Daniel wasn't waiting for the attack. He was preparing for it as if it were a construction project. First, a chain boom, a heavy chain across the entrance to the bay, from cape to cape, 200 meters. Chiwan forged the links for a week, day and night. 3 forges worked non-stop. Each link made of iron 2 fingers thick. Daniel calculated the load. A ship with a displacement of 300 tons traveling at a speed of 5 knots. Kinetic energy, impact force, the blug of the chain, the margin. Double. The chain was secured to rock anchors embedded in the granite of the capes. Daniel designed the anchors himself. Embedment depth, 2 meters. He knew that no captain in this world calculates the strength of a chain boom. They hang the chain and hope. He didn't hope. He calculated. Second, the batteries, not catapults. He didn't know how to build catapults. The system wouldn't show a blueprint because he wasn't an armorer and didn't remember the design precisely enough. But he knew something else. Catapults, simple ones, based on a lever with a counterweight, a trebuchet. He remembered the principle: a long lever, a short arm with a weight, a long arm with a sling. The weight falls, the lever strikes. The stone flies. Physics, high school physics. But physics he knew for sure, unlike catapults. He built 3 trebuchets, small ones, not siege type, wall-mounted, with a 4-meter arm, a 200-kilogram counterweight. Range, 300 meters. Stones weighing 5 kilograms, enough to pierce the deck of a wooden ship. He positioned them at 3 points around the perimeter of the bay, with overlapping firing sectors. Any ship entering the bay came under fire from at least 2 trebuchets simultaneously. The third, a false lighthouse. On a reef 2 miles northwest of the bay, a stone pedestal, an oil lamp in a bronze housing forged by Chi Wan. The light was dimmer than that of a real lighthouse, but sufficient that at night and in bad weather it could be mistaken for the main one. The reefs around the pedestal are sharp, submerged, invisible. Any ship heading toward that light will lose its bottom. Fourth, submerged barriers at the entrance to the bay. Rocks dumped in shallow water at precisely calculated locations, not haphazardly, according to a plan, leaving a single, safe channel, narrow, just wide enough for 1 ship. Any fleet entering the bay would be forced to proceed in single file, under trebuchet fire, behind a chain boom. He wasn't building a fortress. He was building a trap. Geographical engineering. The bay itself was a weapon. He simply helped it. Amber trained the guard. 40 men, not soldiers, fishermen, sailors, carpenters, but with cutlasses and bows, and a woman who commanded them with a voice that made you want to stand at attention, even if you didn't know what that was. Rachel was gathering information, through merchants, through fishermen, through her channels in Velros that she didn't talk about. Chiron the Walrus was gathering a fleet, 30 ships, maybe more. It would come from the south in 2 or 3 weeks. She said it was an armada, that 30 ships against a single port was a death sentence, that we need to call for help. Velros, Eridine, anyone. Daniel said no, help won't arrive in time. Help will create a dependency. Help means Silverhook can't defend itself, and Silverhook can. He showed her the defense blueprint. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up. Then she said he was either a genius or a madman, and that the difference between them lay in the outcome. Lena prepared the documents, siege protocols, legal justifications, letters to the trading houses. If an attack occurred, the world had to know that Silverhook had defended itself and not provoked it. A paper war running parallel to the real one. Mickey was counting. Supplies, water, food, arrows, stones for the trebuchets, firewood, oil, ropes, everything. She had a complete inventory of every item in the port in her head. She could say how many arrows there were for each defensive position, how many days the food supply would last, how many barrels of oil for the decoy lighthouse. Hyun prayed, not because she believed prayer would stop the pirates, because the people around her believed it would. And when the priestess of the 7 winds stood on the cliff above the lighthouse in blue and silver and prayed, the fishermen and sailors below stood a little straighter. They held their weapons a little tighter. They were a little less afraid. Chi Wan was forging arrowheads, 200, 20 a day. She didn't speak. She forged, stroke after stroke, arrowhead after arrowhead, her way of preparing for battle. Daniel stood on the lighthouse and looked out to sea. He waited. He knew that everything he could build, he had built. The blueprints were ready. The traps were set. All that was left was to wait. And drink tea. Hyun climbed up to him, with a cane, up the spiral staircase, as always, slowly, as always, silently. She sat down next to him. He brewed tea. Local herbs, bitter, fragrant. They drank in silence, gazing at the sea. He thought, in a week, pirate ships would be here, 30 of them, with boarding parties, with flaming arrows, with a man named Kyron Moores, who had united all the pirate clans of the Southern Sea and disrupted trade routes so that half the island principalities were already paying him tribute. Against him stood a port with 40 militiamen and 3 catapults, and one engineer who, in a past life, had built container terminals, not fortresses. Hyun looked at him, as if she could hear his thoughts. She said that the architect Orna wasn't a warrior either. He built ports, not fortresses. But when a threat arose, he used what he knew: the port as a weapon, walls as a shield, water as an ally. She said that Daniel was doing the same thing. He looked at her. She called him Daniel, not Kale, for the first time. He didn't correct her. She didn't apologize. They finished their tea. He cleared away the cups. 32 ships. Rachel was off by 2. They appeared at dawn, black sails. That was the first thing Daniel saw from the lighthouse, black against orange. Sunrise and war. He didn't go down. He stood on the lighthouse platform with a cup of tea in his hand and counted the sails. 32. 20 small, fast ones, 10 medium ones, 2 large ones. Flagships. One of them belonged to Kyron Moores. He took a sip of tea. Bitter. Hot. He looked down at the bay. The chain boom was set. The trebuchets were loaded. Men were in position. Amber was at the first pier, with a cutlass, with a guard. 40 men, armed, ready. A false beacon burned on the reef, a faint light in the morning mist. Daniel watched and waited. The pirate fleet sailed in a column, slowly, cautiously. They knew the bay, or thought they did. The lead ships formed a line. 5 small, fast vessels moved forward. Reconnaissance. They were heading toward the entrance to the bay, and the first of them hit the submerged barriers. The sound was like a fist hitting a table. Dull. Heavy. The hull of a wooden ship slamming into a rock. The ship jerked, listed, righted itself. But its speed dropped. It began to turn. The second one passed to the left. It found another rock. A screech, a crack. It didn't list, it stopped. It sat on the rock. The 3 remaining ships slowed down. They began to feel their way. One found the channel. Narrow, just wide enough for one ship. It followed it, slowly, as if walking a tightrope. Behind it, the second, the third, in single file, just as Daniel had calculated. The first ship reached the boom, a chain, heavy, stretched between the headlands half a meter above the water. The ship bumped into it with its bow. The chain tightened. It hummed. The ship stopped. The captain shouted. Boarders ran out onto the bow with axes. They began to chop, metal against metal. Sparks, screams. The chain wouldn't give. Chi-Wan had forged every link herself, 2 fingers thick. And at that moment, the trebuchet fired. The first stone struck the deck of the second ship in the column. The planks exploded into splinters, screams. The second stone flew past. It fell into the water next to the side of the third ship, a column of spray. The third stone hit its mark, into the mast of the first ship at the bow. The mast creaked. It didn't break, but it tilted. The sails sagged. The ship lost speed. The pirates were trapped. The channel was narrow. There was nowhere to turn. A chain ahead, their own men pressing from behind, stones from above. Daniel stood on the lighthouse and watched. The tea had gone cold in his hand. He wasn't drinking. He was observing. Like a teacher during an exam. No, like an engineer observing a structural test. The load is applied, the structure holds. Or it doesn't. The structure held. 3 ships were stuck in the channel. 2 ran aground on the rocks. The remaining 27 stood in the open sea beyond the line of barriers and could not enter. They saw that the channel was deadly, that the keel wouldn't break, that the stones flew accurately and frequently. The trebuchets reloaded every 3 minutes. Daniel had calculated the reload time in advance and practiced the calculations for a week. 3 stones a minute, from 3 points, with crossfire. Any ship in the channel would take at least 2 stones before it could retreat. Kyron Moritz was no fool. He didn't send the rest of the ships into the same trap. He withdrew the fleet, regrouped. And he did exactly what Daniel had expected. He sent 10 ships around the bend, to the northern shore, to look for another entrance to the bay. There was no other entrance. Daniel knew the island's map by heart. The northern shore was cliffs, precipices, reefs. Not a single cove, not a single beach suitable for landing. But Kyron didn't know that. He spent 4 hours scouting the northern shore. 4 hours during which Daniel repaired the damage from the flaming arrows the pirates had begun firing from a distance. 2 arrows hit the warehouse roof. The straw caught fire. They put it out in a minute. 1 hit the hull of the merchant ship at the pier. They put it out with a wet sail. 1 hit the side of the trebuchet at southern position. The wood began to smoke. They put it out with water from a bucket. Minor damage, nothing critical. The boom held. The barriers held. The trebuchets were working. The port stood firm. By evening, Kyron tried again. A night attack. Boats. 20 small boats with boarders. Approach quietly. Cut the boom. Land on the shore. They headed for the false lighthouse, in the dark, guided by the light. 10 out of 20. The other 10 toward the real entrance. Daniel had been waiting for exactly this. That's why he built the false lighthouse on the reef. 10 rowboats ran aground on the reefs. A crash, a scream, a splash. Half of them capsized. People in the water, in the dark, on sharp rocks. The remaining 10 approached the barge. Quietly, carefully. They began sawing through the chain. Amber was waiting for them on the cape, with 10 archers. Arrows flew down, into the rowboats, into the people. A brief, vicious skirmish in the dark. 3 rowboats sunk, the rest retreated. The barge was intact. Morning of the second day, Kyron stood on the deck of the flagship and looked out at the bay. Daniel stood on the lighthouse and looked at Kyron. 200 meters between them. They could not see each other's faces, but they both knew. The battle was over. Kyron had lost 5 ships, 2 on the rocks, 3 sunk by the rocks. Dozens of men, killed, wounded, drowned on the reefs by the false lighthouse. The bay was not taken. The line was not broken. The port was not burned. Kyron could have continued, could have besieged the island for weeks, starved them out, but that required supplies, and his ships were filled with fighters, not food. He had come for a quick attack, enter, burn, leave. It didn't work out. He turned around. 32 minus 5. 27 black sails headed south, slowly, wearily, like a defeated flock. Daniel watched them go. Hyun sat beside him, with a cup of tea. She asked how he felt. He thought for a moment, said he felt like he did after turning in a project, when everything's calculated and everything works, and you can finally breathe a sigh of relief. She nodded. Then she said that now the whole world would know that Silverhook was impregnable. After the defeat of Kyron, the world changed, not slowly, abruptly. The first ambassador arrived a week later, from Velros, the Meriden trading house, the senior partner in person. An elderly man in expensive velvet, with documents, with proposals, with money. He wanted exclusive rights to the northern pier. Daniel refused, politely. The port is free. There are no exclusive rights. There is priority mooring for an increased fee. The ambassador haggled for 3 days. Lena and Mickey took turns sitting with him. like she-wolves taking turns cornering a deer. The ambassador left with a contract for priority mooring at a rate twice the standard fee, and with the look of a man who had been outmaneuvered by their own children. The second ambassador arrived 2 weeks later, an Aradinian from Yusuf ibn Rashid, with silk, with spices,
with a proposal for a trade alliance. Daniel accepted. The terms were simple. Aradine ships would receive permanent berths at the second pier. Silverhook would gain access to Aradine trade routes, a mutual benefit. The third ambassador arrived a month later, the Northern League, not Remington, another house, the Carmine House, the military. They wanted to station a garrison on the island to protect trade routes. Daniel refused. No foreign garrisons. Silverhook defends itself. It has proven that. Envoys came one after another, every week. Trading houses, military houses, priestly orders, island principalities that wanted to trade through Silverhook, fishing guilds that wanted to winter in a safe harbor, each with an offer, each with conditions. Each was met by Lena and Mickey. Each left with a contract written according to Silverhook's rules. Not his, theirs. Rachel was working, quietly, invisibly. From her office in the lighthouse, she could see every ship entering and leaving the bay. She knew who was on board, where they were coming from, where they were headed, what they were carrying. She knew this because she talked to people. In the tavern, on the pier, at the guest house, she talked like someone who was simply curious. And every evening she wrote it down. Not for Velros. She had long since stopped writing reports to Velros. She wrote for Daniel. Intelligence reports. Daily. Who had arrived, what they were saying, what rumors were circulating, what threats, what opportunities. Daniel read them every morning, with tea, like a newspaper. Rachel was his eyes and ears, and she was that by her own choice. Daniel was building. He was always building. After the siege, he began expanding the port, a fourth pier, a fifth, new warehouses, a second row of houses, a school, not a navigation school, an ordinary one, for children. Because children had appeared in the settlement. Families. People who had come not to trade or fish, but to live. He built a school out of light-colored stone with large windows. And he hired a teacher, an old Velrosian scholar who had fled his debts and ended up on the island by chance and stayed because no one was looking for him here, and because they fed him here. By the middle of the second year, the population had surpassed 500, then 600. Ships arrived every day, 3, 5, 10 at a time. Up to 40 ships were moored at the docks at once. The bay was bustling. Cargo, trade, voices, and 10 languages. The smell of spices and resin and salt water. Daniel watched it all from the lighthouse, every evening, with tea. And every evening he saw what others did not see, that the port was small, that the bay could hold more, that 5 piers were not enough, that 10 were needed, that a second dry dock was needed, larger than the first, for ships up to 2,000 tons, that a sewer system was needed because 600 people wasn't a village anymore, it was a city, that a fortress wall was needed, not against pirates. The breakwater and barriers handled that. Against time. Against growth. A city must have boundaries to grow properly, not spread out like porridge on a plate. He sketched in the evenings. New plans, bigger, more complex. Rank B gave him shipyard lighthouses and multi-level piers. Rank A would give him dry docks and harbors with tidal locks. Rank S? He hadn't thought about Rank S yet. Not yet. Hyun spent her evenings with him, in the temple. They talked. About Orna, about what lay sleeping beneath the water. She had found new symbols in the ruins, not an architect's. Others. Warnings, carved into the stone, pictograms, a wave, an eye, a chain. Something locked at the bottom, something held in place by the harbor walls, walls that no longer exist. She said that Orn didn't just build ports.
Orn built prisons for something that lived in the depths, and when the empire fell, the walls were left unguarded, and what lay beyond the port began to awaken, slowly. 5 centuries of slow awakening. Daniel listened and thought about the system in his head, about how Orn's last architect had woven his experience into the stones of this island, not out of kindness, out of necessity, because he knew that one day someone would have to rebuild the walls. He wasn't called by fate. He was hired by a dead man for a job that hadn't even begun yet. He looked out at the bay, at the dark water beyond the headlands, at the depths that even a survey of the terrain could only vaguely reveal. Something was there, under the water, in the ruins of old Orn Tal. Something that had drowned an empire 500 years ago. Something that had been sleeping and was beginning to wake. In the 4th month of the 2nd year, Lena found the diary. Daniel had been keeping it since the 1st month. In English, in Korean letters where words were lacking, in a notebook made of homemade paper. He wrote down calculations, formulas, technical notes, things he couldn't keep in his head because there were too many of them. He left the notebook on the table, open. On the page where it said, Day 87, the aqueduct is working normally. Flow rate 2.3 liters per minute at current lens level. Need to check the sealant on the 3rd elbow. I miss coffee. I miss the phone. I miss Mom. Mom's name is Kim Soo-yeon. She lives in Incheon, or lived. I don't know if she's alive because I'm dead. I'm dead in a world where there's coffee and phones and Mom. I'm alive in a world where there's bamboo and basalt and a girl who thinks I'm her brother. I'm not her brother. My name is Daniel Hyun. I'm 29 years old. I'm an engineer. I died in Seoul under the wheels of a taxi. I'm not Kale Vesper. Lena was reading in Korean. No, Lena wasn't reading in Korean, but she was reading in Velrosian, and the last sentences were written in Velrosian. I'm not her brother. My name is not Kale. She was standing by the table, with an open notebook in her hands, white, motionless, like a stone. Daniel walked into the room and saw her, and the notebook, and he understood. That was it. Time was up. The lie he'd been building for 16 months had collapsed, not from someone else's blow, from his own carelessness. He had forgotten to close the notebook, just as he used to forget to lock the doors at the construction site in Singapore, just as he used to forget to turn off the coffee machine at the Bechtel office. A small habit, a huge consequence. Lena turned to face him. He expected a scream, tears, accusations, hatred. She was silent. She looked at him, for a long time, with eyes that held it all. He couldn't read them, not anger, not pain. Something deeper. She asked who he was, quietly, calmly, with the voice of a diplomat, not a crying child. He sat down in the chair across from her, looked her in the eyes, and told her everything. Daniel Hyun, Incheon, MIT, Singapore, Rotterdam, Jebel Ali, rain in Seoul, a taxi, death, waking up on a beach in a stranger's body, the architect's system, blueprints in his head. He spoke for 20 minutes, without pauses, without embellishment, like a report at a meeting. Facts, dates, numbers. She listened, without interrupting, without looking away. When he finished, she was silent, for a minute, 2. He sat and waited, braced for her to get up and leave, for her to say he was a monster, that he had stolen her brother's face, that he had been deceiving her for 16 months, that she would never forgive him. She stood up, walked over to him, stopped a step away, looked down at him. He was sitting. She was standing. A 17-year-old girl who had crossed the sea in a fishing boat to find her brother, and found a stranger. She hugged him, tightly, just like back then, on the pier, 16 months ago. Her thin arms, her ribs aching. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder. She was silent. Then she spoke softly into his shirt. She said she knew, not from the first day, but for a long time. She said her brother Kale was kind but weak, that he would never have lifted a stone heavier than a book, that he was afraid of the sea and hated the cold and cried when their father yelled at him, that the man who built the port from nothing with his bare hands on bare rock was not Kale. She knew. She was silent, because this man, Daniel, did what Kale would never have done. He stayed.
He didn't run away. He didn't abandon her. He called her by name on the pier and hugged her and became her brother, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Kale, the real Kale, wouldn't have stayed. She knew her brother. She loved him. But she knew. She stepped back, looked him in the eyes, wet, not hers, his. She said he was her brother, more than Kale ever was, because he stayed. And that's all that matters. He couldn't speak. His throat tightened. He nodded. She wiped his eyes with her palm, small, pale, with an ink stain on her index finger from the evening tally. Then she turned to the desk, picked up the notebook, closed it, put it in the drawer, and said that dinner was in an hour, and that Mickey had recalculated the customs fees again, and that Rachel wanted to discuss the patrol route, and that Amber had broken her third crutch and needed a new one. A typical evening. Routine matters, as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't turned upside down. He looked at her, at this girl, no, at this woman, 17 years old, with 6 languages and accounting skills and an understanding of people that no university can teach. She accepted the truth, processed it, put it away, and went on living. At dinner, everything was as usual. Lena sat on the right, Amber on the left, Mickey across from them, arguing with Lena about port tariffs. Rachel was silent, watching. Hyun ate slowly and looked at Daniel. He felt her gaze, met it. She tilted her head slightly. She knew. She had known for a long time. And now she saw that Lena knew too, and that the world hadn't fallen apart. Shiwan sat at the end of the table, silent, eating. She wasn't looking at anyone, but on Daniel's plate lay the knife she had forged that day. New, sharp, with a wooden handle, without words. It just lay there. Her way of saying something she didn't know how to say. He picked up the knife, turned it over in his hand. Good balance. A sharp blade. He looked at Chi-Wan. She didn't look up, but the tips of her ears had turned red. The evening ended, people dispersed. Daniel was left alone, at the table, with the knife in his hand. He thought, Lena knows. Hyun knows. Rachel suspects. Mickey catches him in his slip-ups. Amber. Amber looks at him in a way that makes it impossible for him to read her eyes. And that scares him the most. Chi-Wan. Chi-Wan doesn't think about it. She doesn't care who he is. What matters to her is that he gave her the forge and called her a master. 6 women. 6 stories. 6 wounds he healed. Not because he wanted to, because he couldn't do otherwise. Because every building in this port he built for someone. And every building healed someone's pain. He put the knife on the table, stood up, went out, climbed the lighthouse. Night, stars, wind, fire. The port below, sleeping, quiet, alive. A year and 4 months, on a knife and a barrel of water. Before that, they came for him in the 3rd year, not people, the deep. Daniel was standing on the lighthouse when it began. Early morning, dawn, the sea smooth as glass.
No wind, no waves, dead calm. And from beneath the water near the ruins, bubbles, huge, each the size of a boat. They rose slowly, one after another, bursting on the surface with a dull, guttural sound that he felt more with his chest than with his ears. The terrain analysis kicked in on its own, without his command. For the first time in 3 years, the system did something without being asked. And he saw it, underwater, deep down, below the foundations of Orntal, below the bedrock,
where the basalt gave way to something older and darker. Movement. Something enormous. Something that lay coiled around the island's base like a tree root around a rock. Something that had been sleeping for 5 centuries and was now waking up. The system displayed a message, red, flashing. He hadn't seen one like this in 3 years. An Orn-class threat detected. Immediate construction of defensive structures is required. Recommended rank, S. His current rank, A. He stood on the lighthouse and looked at the red message and the bubbles and the dark shadow beneath the water. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt what he had felt on the first day, on the beach, with a barrel of water and a knife. Complete, total loneliness in the face of a task greater than himself. Then he exhaled, turned around, he went down. He walked through the harbor, past the docks where the morning merchants were already mooring, past the tavern where the smell of fresh bread wafted, past the smithy where Chi-Wan was already hammering away, past the navigation school where Amber was yelling at the cadets, past customs where Mickey was counting, past the infirmary where Ha-Yun was bandaging someone's arm, past the reception hall where Lena was sorting through documents. He walked through his entire port, through his city, through the place he had built from nothing over 3 years with his own hands and mind and stubbornness and love for people he didn't know when he started. He reached the workshop. His workshop. A large room at the base of the lighthouse with drafting tables and tools and maps and models. He sat down at the table, spread out a blank sheet of paper, took a piece of charcoal, and began to draw. Not the pier, not the warehouse, not the lighthouse. A wall. An underwater wall, around the base of the island, at a depth of 20 meters, made of basalt and concrete, on the foundation laid by Orna's builders 500 years ago. A wall that held what lay beneath. A wall that collapsed when the empire fell. A wall that needed to be restored. He drew. The system displayed the results. Rank A gave him harbors with tidal locks. That wasn't enough. He needed rank S. He needed a 4th-generation deep-water terminal. He worked all day, all evening, all night. By morning, the blueprint was ready. Complete. Detailed. Every stone, every joint, every anchor. An underwater wall 3 kilometers in circumference, 10 meters high, 5 meters thick, with buttresses every 20 meters, with drainage channels to relieve pressure, with keystones at key points that bind the structure into a single whole. He looked at the blueprint. Impossible. Impossible for one person. Impossible for 100 people with pickaxes and boats. Impossible for an entire kingdom with an army of masons. Impossible within a reasonable time frame. He closed his eyes, opened them, looked again, then stood up, walked out. He gathered them all in the reception hall. Amber, Lena, Ha-Yun, Mickey, Rachel, Chi-Wan. Captain Tobias, who happened to be at the port. 12 senior port officials. 23 people at a long table. He told them, not everything, not about the system, not about another world, about the fact that beneath the island there is something that has been sleeping and is waking up, about the fact that the Orn Empire perished because of it, about the fact that the walls of Orntal were not only a port, but also a cage,
about the fact that the walls have been destroyed, about the fact that new ones must be built. Hyun confirmed it. The order knew. Warnings carved in stone, pictograms, the wave, the eye, the chain. It's not a legend, it's a fact. Rachel said that bubbles have been rising from beneath the water near the ruins for 3 weeks now, and that fishermen are afraid to go out to the southern side of the bay. Amber said that if they need to build, then build, but she'll stand between the construction site and whatever's down there and let it try to rise. Lena said that funding, that Silverhook has enough reputation to borrow from any trading house, that she would write letters to Yusuf ibn Rashid, to Velros, and to the Northern League. Mickey said that if supplies and materials were needed for the construction project of the century, she knew every supplier in every port of the Emerald Sea, every price and every discount. Chi-Wan said nothing. She stood up and left. 10 minutes later, the sound of hammering came from the smithy. She had begun to forge. Daniel watched them, these people, who 3 years ago were nobodies, a broken navigator's assistant, a lonely girl, an abandoned priestess, a merchant's daughter who wasn't taken seriously, a faithless spy, a blacksmith without a forge. Now they were everything. His people, his port, his family. He wasn't building the port for himself, he built it for them. And now he had to build one more thing. The biggest, the most important. A wall that would protect not just the port, the entire archipelago, the whole world. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the bay. 38 ships were moored at the docks. A fire burned on the lighthouse. 800 people lived in the port. The school taught the children, the tavern fed the hungry, the infirmary treated the sick, the smithy forged iron, the navigation school trained navigators, the temple offered peace. He built all of this, from nothing, with a knife and a barrel of water. And now he will build more, because this is his job, because the dead man hired him 500 years ago for this very purpose, because he is the only one who can. He turned to the table, unfolded the blueprint of the underwater wall, looked at the 23 faces. All right, we have a lot of work. A week later, a fleet approached the island. Not a pirate fleet, not a military one. A merchant fleet. 12 ships. With stone, with iron, with people. Yusuf ibn Rashid sent his first, followed by Velros, followed by the Northern League, even the House of Vespers, even Remington. Because if what lies beneath the water awakens, it won't just be Silverhook that sinks. Everything will sink. And anyone who knows about the sea knows this. Daniel stood on the pier and received the ships, one after another. Stone, iron, people, supplies, working hands. He knew every one of them. Not personally, professionally. He knew what they needed. Shelter, work, food, safety, purpose. He gave them all of that, just as he had from day one. Because a port isn't just buildings. A port is the people who live in them. A month later, construction was in full swing. Divers were lowering stones. Masonry workers were laying walls in the shallows. Chi-Wan was forging anchor shackles and anchors. Amber was commanding a fleet of workboats. Mickey was calculating material usage. Lena negotiated with suppliers. Rachel gathered information about what lay below. Hyun studied the ruins and deciphered Orna's symbols. Daniel designed. Every stone, every joint, every meter of the wall. The system was working at its limit. Rank A gave him harbors and locks. The wall demanded more. Every completed section provided experience. The bar toward rank S crept upward, slowly, but surely. Stone by stone, day by day. The wall grew. Underwater, invisible, but real, like everything he built. 3 months later, the rank rose, from A to S. The system flashed gold. New blueprints, A fourth-generation deep-water terminal. He saw it and froze. Not from joy, from the scale. The system showed him what he had designed in his past life, only here, in stone and concrete instead of steel and reinforced concrete. And not for container ships, for a wall that holds the world together. He drew all night, a new plan, with an S rank, faster, more precise, stronger. The wall closed around the island's base 6 months after construction began. 3 kilometers long, 10 meters high, 5 meters thick. Basalt on concrete and the Orna foundation, buttresses, drainage, keystones. When the last stone fell into place, the system flashed. Not blue, not green, not gold. White. The Orntal defensive structure has been restored. The legacy has been accepted. The bubbles stopped. The water calmed. What lay beneath had not vanished, but it slept again, behind the wall. Behind the stone and concrete and engineering calculations and 12 years of education and 6 years of practice of a man from another world who had been hired 500 years ago. Daniel stood on the lighthouse. Evening. Sunset. The bay was golden. 42 ships at the docks. Among them, the flagship of the Velrosian embassy, the old chancellor of the House of Vesper, Remington's father, Cale's uncle. He had come not because Daniel had called him. He had come because the world knew. Silverhook had saved the archipelago. The wall stood. The port stands. The ceremonial hall, light stone, dark wood, tall windows overlooking the bay. The chancellor entered with his entourage. He bows. Freeport protocol. He looks up and sees. At the table, his nephew. In a dark blue shirt without a crest. With Lena on his right, Amber on his left. Lena in a dress in the colors of House Vesper, Amber with a cleaver at her belt. Hyun by the window in blue and silver, Mickey next to the treasury books. Rachel in the shadows by the far wall, Shiwan by the door, in a leather apron, with soot-stained hands. 8 seconds of silence. The chancellor very slowly drops to one knee. For the first time in 40 years of service, he says one word, nephew. Then adds, I didn't know. Daniel stands up, walks around the table, lifts the old man by the shoulders. Quietly, without anger,